The first snowfall of the season came early to Silverton, Colorado, in September of 1878. Unusual and unwelcome, the flakes drifted down like ash, coating the mining town in a premature shroud of white. But it wasn't the unseasonable snow that drew townsfolk from their beds that night. It was the orange glow against the darkness, the crackle of timber, and the screams that echoed through the mountain air. Rosalie Morgan dragged the frail body through the snow, her hands raw and blistered from the heat. Smoke filled her lungs, making each breath a struggle. The elderly woman's nightgown had caught fire, and though Rosalie had managed to smother the flames, the smell of burnt flesh hung in the air between them. "Help!" Rosalie's voice cracked as she called out to the figures approaching through the swirling snow. "Please, she needs a doctor." The small cabin that had been her home for the past month was now engulfed in flames, the roof already collapsing inward with a shower of sparks. The heat pressed against her back as she knelt beside the still form of Hester Graves, the woman who had taken her in when no one else would. Sheriff Marshal Jenkins pushed through the gathering crowd, his badge catching the firelight, as he knelt opposite Rosalie. His weathered face revealed nothing as he pressed two fingers against Mrs. Graves's neck, then slowly shook his head. "She's gone, girl." Rosalie's hands trembled as she brushed a strand of gray hair from the old woman's face. "No, I just pulled her out. She was breathing." The sheriff rose his eyes hard as flint as he looked down at her. "What happened here, Miss Morgan? The lamp fell when she tripped." Rosalie explained, words tumbling out between chattering teeth. "I was asleep. By the time I woke, the curtains were already convenient," a voice called from the crowd. "Old woman takes in a stranger. Next thing you know, her house burns down with her in it." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Rosalie recognized the speaker as Mr. Peterson from the general store, who had refused to extend her credit just last week. "It was an accident," Rosalie insisted, rising to her feet. The world tilted dangerously, and she realized the sleeve of her nightgown was soaked with blood where a burning beam had grazed her arm. "We've had enough accidents around these parts," the sheriff said, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his pistol. "Miss Morgan, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of arson and murder." "Murder?" Rosalie's voice rose in disbelief. "Mrs. Graves was kind to me. Why would I hurt her?" But the crowd's faces had already hardened against her. The strange girl who kept to herself, who was seen scribbling in notebooks, who had appeared in town with nothing but a small carpetbag and secrets in her eyes. The sheriff's grip was firm, but not cruel, as he guided her toward the jailhouse. Behind them, men organized a bucket brigade, though it was clear the cabin was beyond saving. Rosalie looked back once at the burning structure at the body, now covered with someone's coat, and felt the last threads of her hope turn to ash. The Silverton jailhouse was a small, squat building of rough-hewn timber, with two cells separated by iron bars. Rosalie sat on a thin mattress in one, while three women occupied the other. They wore bright dresses with too much rouge on their cheeks, and they watched Rosalie with curious eyes. "What did you do, honey?" asked the oldest, a woman with fading red hair and lines etched deep around her mouth. "You don't look the type for trouble." Rosalie stared at her bandaged arm. A doctor had been called to treat her burns, though he'd done so with obvious reluctance. "They think I killed my landlady, that I set her house on fire." "Did you?" asked another woman, younger, with blonde curls and a southern drawl. "No." Rosalie looked up, meeting their eyes. "It was an accident." The women exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "I'm Lily," said the redhead. "That's Pearl and Ruby. We work at the Silver Spur." Rosalie had heard of the Silver Spur Saloon. It sat at the edge of town, where the respectable folk of Silverton wouldn't have to acknowledge its existence too directly, though its menfolk found their way there readily enough. "Rosalie Morgan," she replied. "Rose." "Well, Rose," Lily said, settling back against the wall. "Whatever your story is, it doesn't much matter now. Once they decide you're guilty in this town, that's pretty much the end of it." "But there has to be a trial, doesn't there?" Rosalie asked, panic rising in her throat. "They can't just—" "Trial," Pearl laughed a harsh sound. "Honey, they hanged a man last month on less evidence than they got against you." The cell door rattled, and all four women looked up as Sheriff Jenkins appeared with another man. Tall and broad-shouldered, the newcomer wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the coarseness beneath. His dark hair was slicked back with pomade, and a heavy gold watch chain stretched across his vest. "Ladies," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "you've been granted a reprieve. Mr. Fletcher has paid your fines." Lily and the others stood quickly, smoothing their dresses. "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," they murmured in unison. The sheriff unlocked their cell, and as the women filed out, Fletcher's gaze settled on Rosalie. She fought the urge to shrink back from the coldness in his stare. "And who might this be?" he asked, gesturing toward Rosalie with a cigar he produced from his vest pocket. "Rosalie Morgan," the sheriff replied, "arrested last night for the murder of Hester Graves." "Is that so?" Fletcher stepped closer to Rosalie's cell, studying her like a horse at auction. "The old woman up on Ridge Road." "Yes, sir." Jenkins nodded. "Cabin burned to the ground with the old lady inside. This one claims it was an accident." Fletcher struck a match against the cell bars, the sudden flare illuminating his face in harsh relief. As he lit his cigar, Rosalie caught a glimpse of cruelty in the set of his mouth. "What's her bail?" Fletcher asked, exhaling a cloud of smoke. The sheriff looked surprised. "She's not been arraigned yet, Victor, and she's up for murder." "I asked what her bail is." Fletcher's voice hardened. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "Judge won't be here until next week, but I'd reckon no less than $50, considering." Fletcher nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Rosalie. "I'll pay it, and I'll take responsibility for her." Rosalie stood gripping the bars. "I don't know you, sir. I don't need your charity." "Charity?" Fletcher laughed the sound like gravel. "No, Miss Morgan, this isn't charity. This is business. You now owe me $50 plus interest, and you'll work it off at my establishment until every cent is paid." Understanding dawned, sending a chill through Rosalie that had nothing to do with the cold cell. "I'm not that kind of woman," she said quietly. Fletcher's smile widened. "Everyone's that kind of woman when the alternative is a hangman's noose." He turned to the sheriff. "Draw up the papers, Marshal. I'll be back this afternoon with the money." After the men left, Rosalie sank back onto the thin mattress, her mind racing. 3 years ago, she had been the daughter of respected farmers with a future as bright as the Colorado sky. Then the influenza had taken her parents within days of each other, and the bank had taken their farm when she couldn't keep up with the loan payments. She had tried honest work, sewing, housekeeping, even teaching reading to minors' children. But the pay was never enough, and the wandering hands of employers made each position untenable. So she had come to Silverton hoping for a fresh start, carrying her most precious possessions, her father's pocket watch, her mother's Bible, and the journals in which she recorded her thoughts and observations. Mia's. Graves had been the first person to show her kindness, offering a small room in exchange for help around the house. And now the old woman was dead, and Rosalie was to be sold to a saloon owner to avoid the gallows. She closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her future contracting around her. 2 months later, Rosalie stood behind the bar at the Silver Spur Saloon, her feet aching from 12 hours on the worn wooden floors. Her dress, one of two provided by Fletcher, was cut lower than anything she'd ever worn, though she'd altered it as best she could for modesty's sake. The heavy makeup that Lily had shown her how to apply felt like a mask, and in truth, that's what it was, a disguise to hide the fear that had become her constant companion. The saloon was crowded tonight, miners flush with their monthly pay and eager to spend it on whiskey and women. Rosalie had managed thus far to avoid the fate of Lily and the others. Fletcher had put her to work serving drinks, and keeping the books a task he'd discovered she was uniquely qualified for given her unusual education. But his patience, she knew, was wearing thin. "Another round for the boys at table 3, Lily said, appearing at Rosalie's elbow with an empty tray. The older woman's eyes were tired, but she offered Rosalie a small smile. "How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm fine," Rosalie lied, reaching for clean glasses. "Just tired." "Ain't we all?" Lily glanced over her shoulder, then leaned in closer. "Fletcher has been watching you all night. More than usual." Rosalie's hands trembled slightly as she poured whiskey. "Has he said something?" "Doesn't need to. I know that look." Lily took the filled glasses. "Just be careful. He's been in a mood since that business with the mine payroll." Rosalie had overheard enough to know that Fletcher had interests beyond the saloon interests that occasionally put him at odds with other powerful men in the territory. The ledgers she kept had entries that made little sense for a saloon's business, and she suspected they were coded references to less legal enterprises. "I'll be careful," she promised. As the night wore on, the saloon grew rowdier. A fistfight broke out between two miners, quickly subdued by Fletcher's burly doorman. A card game in the corner turned tense over accusations of cheating, and Rosalie's eyelids grew heavier with each passing hour. She had worked 3 consecutive 16-hour shifts, catching only brief naps during the quiet afternoon hours. The night before, she had been up late cleaning after a particularly messy group of cattle drivers had passed through. Her body ached for rest, and despite her best efforts, her chin dropped to her chest as she stood in a momentary lull at the bar. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Rosalie jerked awake to find Fletcher standing before her, his eyes cold as a mountain stream in winter. The saloon had emptied somewhat, the hour grown late enough that even the most dedicated drinkers had stumbled home. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fletcher," she said quickly. "I was just sleeping on my time," he finished, his voice dangerously soft. "After all my generosity taking you in, keeping you from the hangman's noose, this is how you repay me." "It won't happen again," Rosalie promised, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Fletcher's hand shot out, grabbing her chin with fingers that would leave bruises. "You're right about that." He jerked her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I've been patient, Rosalie, more patient than you deserve, but my investment hasn't been paying off." Fear coiled in Rosalie's stomach. "I've been working every day keeping your books." "The books, yes." Fletcher's grip tightened. "You're good with numbers and letters. Too good, perhaps. Makes me wonder what else those pretty eyes of yours have seen." Rosalie tried to pull away, but Fletcher's other hand tangled in her hair, holding her in place. "Nothing, Mr. Fletcher. I only see what you show me." "Liar." The word was a hiss, followed by a slap that snapped her head to the side and sent her stumbling against the bar. "I know your type. Think you're better than this place, better than the other girls. But you're not." Rosalie tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Her vision swam, but she forced herself to stand upright, one hand unbraced against the bar for support. "Starting tonight, you'll be entertaining special customers," Fletcher continued, adjusting his cufflinks as if he hadn't just struck her. "Mr. Peterson has expressed particular interest. Seems he's had his eye on you since you first came to town." No, the word escaped before Rosalie could stop it, quiet but firm. Fletcher's face darkened. "What did you say to me?" "I said no." Rosalie straightened, ignoring the pounding in her head. "I'll serve drinks. I'll keep your books, but I won't do that." For a moment, Fletcher seemed too shocked to respond. Then his features twisted with rage, and his hand rose again, this time formed into a fist. "Worthless bitch," he snarled. "I don't think you understand your position." Rosalie raised her arms in a futile attempt to protect herself, her slender form no match for Fletcher's bulk. She closed her eyes, waiting for the blow. It never came. Instead, there was a sudden stillness in the air, followed by Fletcher's grunt of surprise and pain. Rosalie opened her eyes to see a tall stranger holding Fletcher's wrist in what appeared to be an iron grip. The saloon owner's face contorted in discomfort. "That's enough," the stranger said, his voice low, but carrying through the suddenly silent room. "No more hands will ever touch this woman like that again." Rosalie had never seen him before, tall and broad-shouldered with a beard trimmed short over a strong jaw. His eyes were a striking gray-blue, cold as steel, but with something like banked fire behind them. Dust covered his dark coat and trousers, suggesting he'd ridden far, but the revolver at his hip looked well-maintained and ready for use. Fletcher wrenched his arm away, rubbing his wrist. "This ain't your business, stranger. This girl works for me, not anymore she doesn't." The man's eyes never left Fletcher's face. "What's your name, miss?" Rosalie swallowed, tasting blood. "Rosalie Morgan, sir." "I'm Gabriel Reed." He tipped his hat slightly. "And I believe you're coming with me." Rosalie hesitated, caught between fear of the unknown and the certainty of Fletcher's continuing abuse. Behind Fletcher, the bartender reached under the counter, likely for the shotgun kept there. "Don't," Gabriel said, not looking at the bartender but somehow aware of his movement. "Unless you want to explain to the undertaker how you got those fancy buttons blown through your spine." The bartender's hand emerged empty. Fletcher's face had turned an ugly purple. "You can't just walk in here and take my property." "She's not property," Gabriel said, "and I'm not asking." He turned to Rosalie. "Get your things. We're leaving." Rosalie didn't need to be told twice. She hurried to the small room she shared with Lily and Ruby, gathering her meager possessions into the same carpetbag she'd arrived with months before. Her journals, carefully hidden beneath a loose floorboard, went in first, followed by her parents' keepsakes and the single dress she'd brought to Silverton. Her hands shook as she changed from the revealing saloon dress into her own modest clothing. Questions tumbled through her mind. Who was this stranger? Why was he helping her? Where would they go? Was he truly any better than Fletcher? When she returned to the main floor, Gabriel stood exactly where she'd left him, his stance relaxed but ready. Fletcher glowered from behind the bar, nursing a drink and his wounded pride. "You'll regret this," Fletcher called, as Gabriel guided Rosalie toward the door, one hand protectively at the small of her back. Nobody crosses Victor Fletcher in Silverton. Outside, the night air was crisp, with the promise of winter stars pricking the velvet darkness above the mountains. Rosalie shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. Gabriel studied her face with a frown. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question, but Rosalie answered anyway. "I'll be fine." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he didn't press. Instead, he led her to a magnificent black stallion tethered outside the saloon. He secured her bag and helped her mount, then swung up behind her. The horse snorted and pranced powerful muscles bunching beneath them. "Where are we going?" Rosalie finally asked, as they rode out of town past curious onlookers. "My ranch," Gabriel replied, "about 15 miles outside of town." "Why are you helping me?" She couldn't keep the suspicion from her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. Gabriel was silent for so long that Rosalie thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less certain, tinged with something like pain. "You reminded me of someone." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Rosalie wanted to ask more, but something in his tone warned against it. Instead, she focused on the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the warmth of Gabriel's solid presence at her back, and the growing distance between herself and the Silver Spur saloon. They rode in silence for what felt like hours, the moon tracking across the sky as they followed a winding trail through pine forests and across open meadows. Finally, they crested a hill, and Rosalie's breath caught at the sight spread before them. A sprawling ranch house nestled in a valley surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. A creek glinted silver in the moonlight, winding through pastures where cattle were dark shapes against the pale grass. Behind it all, the mountains rose like sentinels, their peaks still snow-capped despite the autumn season. "Welcome to the Sunrise Valley Ranch," Gabriel said as they rode down toward the buildings. A lamp burned in the window of the main house, and as they approached, the door opened. An older woman stood silhouetted against the light, a shotgun cradled in her arms. "That you, Gabriel?" Her voice carried sharp and clear through the night air. "It's me, Margaret," he called back. "I've brought a guest." Gabriel dismounted and helped Rosalie down, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. Her legs nearly buckled after the long ride, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. As they approached the house, Rosalie could see the older woman more clearly. Tall and straight-backed, despite her years, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. The shotgun remained in her hands, though pointed at the ground now. "Margaret Winters," Gabriel said by way of introduction. "My housekeeper. Margaret, this is Rosalie Morgan. She'll be staying with us for a while." Margaret's sharp gaze took in Rosalie's bruised face, her travel-worn appearance, and the way she stood slightly behind Gabriel, as if for protection. Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or memory. "Lord above," she murmured, then louder, "Come inside, child. Let's get you settled." As Rosalie moved into the light, Margaret's eyes widened fractionally. She glanced at Gabriel, something unspoken passing between them. "She looks like—" Margaret began, but Gabriel cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "Get her cleaned up and fed," he said. "I'll see to the horse." As he turned away, Margaret leaned close to him, whispering words that Rosalie wasn't meant to hear, but caught nonetheless. "She looks so much like Isabel." Gabriel's shoulders stiffened, but he said nothing, disappearing into the darkness toward the barn. Rosalie followed Margaret into the house, her mind racing with questions. Who was Isabel? And why did Margaret look at her as if she'd seen a ghost? The main room of the ranch house was warm and spacious, with a large stone fireplace along one wall and solid handcrafted furniture arranged for comfort rather than show. Braided rugs softened the wooden floors, and kerosene lamps cast a golden glow over everything. "Sit," Margaret instructed, pointing to a chair near the fire. "I'll fetch water and bandages for that face." When Rosalie hesitated, Margaret's expression softened slightly. "No one's going to hurt you here, girl. Gabriel Reed is many things, but he's not the kind to raise a hand to a woman." "You don't know me," Rosalie said quietly. "Why would he bring me here? Why would you take me in?" Margaret paused, studying Rosalie with eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. Gabriel has his reasons, and I've learned not to question them too closely. She gestured again to the chair. Now sit. You look dead on your feet. Too exhausted to argue further, Rosalie sank into the chair. The warmth of the fire and the unexpected comfort after months of the hard cot at the Silver Spur nearly undid her. She struggled to keep her eyes open as Margaret left the room, returning moments later with a basin of steaming water and clean cloths. With gentle efficiency, the older woman cleaned the cut on Rosalie's cheek and examined the bruise forming where Fletcher had gripped her chin. "Been through the wars, haven't you?" Margaret commented, applying a salve that smelled of witch hazel and herbs. "You could say that." Margaret worked in silence for a moment, then asked, "Where are you from, Rosalie Morgan?" "Denver originally. My parents had a farm outside the city." They died. Influenza 3 years ago." Margaret nodded, as if this confirmed something. "And how did you come to be at that saloon?" Rosalie tensed. "It's a long story." "Most worth telling are." Margaret sat back, hands folded in her lap. "But it can wait until you've rested. You're safe now, whatever your story is." The words were kind, but Rosalie had learned the hard way that safety was an illusion, especially for a woman alone in the world. Still, the promise of it, even temporary, was enough to make her eyes burn with unshed tears. The sound of boots on the porch announced Gabriel's return. He entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and night air. His eyes found Rosalie, immediately assessing. "How is she?" he asked Margaret, as if Rosalie weren't present. "Exhausted, bruised, but nothing that won't heal with time and care." Margaret rose, gathering the basin and cloths. "I've made up the room at the end of the hall, the one with the blue quilt." Something passed across Gabriel's face, pain, perhaps, or memory. "That's the only one ready for a guest," Margaret finished firmly. "Unless you'd prefer she sleep in the barn." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. "Fine." Margaret turned to Rosalie. "Come along, child. Let's get you settled." As Rosalie rose to follow, Gabriel's voice stopped her. "Miss Morgan." She turned, meeting his steel-blue gaze. "Did you set that fire? The one that killed the old woman?" The question hit her like a physical blow. In the shock of the night's events, she'd almost forgotten that she was still technically a fugitive from justice. "No," she said, lifting her chin despite the ache. "It was an accident. The lamp fell when Mrs. Graves tripped in the dark. I tried to save her, but the fire spread so quickly." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded once. "Get some rest. We'll talk more tomorrow." It wasn't quite acceptance of her story, but it wasn't outright disbelief either. Rosalie followed Margaret down a hallway to a small but comfortable bedroom. A large window looked out over the valley, though now it showed only darkness. The bed was covered with a quilt in shades of blue and gray, meticulously pieced and stitched. "There's a nightgown in the chest," Margaret said, lighting a small lamp on the bedside table. "It might be a bit large, but it's clean. Washroom is at the end of the hall. Breakfast is at 6. As the older woman turned to leave, Rosalie gathered her courage. "Mrs. Winters?" Margaret paused at the door. "Just Margaret will do." "Margaret? Who is Isabel?" The housekeeper's face stilled all expression, draining away. For a moment, Rosalie thought she wouldn't answer. "Isabel was Gabriel's wife," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "She died 5 years ago." Before Rosalie could ask more, Margaret slipped out, closing the door firmly behind her. Alone, Rosalie sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling with the day's events. From prisoner to saloon girl to ranch guest in the span of hours. And now the knowledge that she apparently resembled a dead woman, a resemblance striking enough to make Gabriel Reed intervene in her life in the most dramatic fashion possible. She should be frightened, she knew, suspicious at the very least. And yet, as she changed into the borrowed nightgown and slipped between clean sheets, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years' hope. Perhaps it was foolish. Perhaps tomorrow would bring new dangers, new disappointments. But for tonight, in this quiet room, with the sound of the creek murmuring in the distance, Rosalie allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally changed. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the soft glow of dawn filtering through the window. For a disorienting moment, Rosalie couldn't place where she was. The comfortable bed, the blue quilt, the lingering scent of lavender in the pillowcase, all so different from the cramped quarters at the Silver Spur. Then memory rushed back, and she sat up, running a hand through her tangled hair. Her face still ached where Fletcher had struck her, but the rest of her felt better than it had in months. Clean rested and momentarily safe. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Morgan?" Margaret's voice called. "Breakfast in 10 minutes." "Thank you," Rosalie called back. "I'll be right there." She dressed quickly in her one decent dress, now badly wrinkled from its time in the carpetbag. After splashing water on her face from the basin on the washstand, she made her way to the main room. The house looked different in daylight. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating details she'd missed the night before. Bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, a piano in one corner framed photographs on the mantel. It was a home, not just a house, with the marks of long habitation and care. Margaret emerged from what appeared to be the kitchen carrying a plate of biscuits. "There you are. Come eat while it's hot." Rosalie followed her to a large table set with stoneware plates and blue-checked napkins. Gabriel was already seated, a cup of coffee before him, and a ledger open at his elbow. He looked up as she entered, his expression guarded. "Miss Morgan?" "Mr. Reed." Rosalie hesitated, then took the seat Margaret indicated across from him. Margaret bustled about, setting platters of eggs, bacon, and biscuits on the table. "Eat," she instructed. "Both of you. Business can wait until after." They ate in uncomfortable silence, broken only by Margaret's occasional comments about the weather or ranch matters. Rosalie was ravenous, realizing she couldn't remember the last proper meal she'd had. At the Silver Spur, the girls ate whatever leftover stew or beans remained from the kitchen at the end of the night. After the meal, Margaret cleared the plates, waving away Rosalie's offer to help. "You two have matters to discuss," she said firmly. "I'll manage the dishes." When they were alone, Gabriel closed his ledger and fixed Rosalie with a direct gaze. "I owe you an explanation." "Several, I should think," Rosalie replied, surprising herself with her boldness. The corner of Gabriel's mouth twitched almost a smile. "Fair enough." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What do you want to know first?" "Why did you help me last night?" Gabriel's gaze shifted to the window where the morning sun illuminated the distant mountains. "I was in town on business. Stopped for a drink at the Silver Spur." His jaw tightened. "I don't abide men who beat women. Simple as that." But it wasn't that simple, and they both knew it. There was more, much more, that he wasn't saying. "Margaret told me about your wife," Rosalie said quietly. "That I look like her." Gabriel's head snapped back to her, his eyes sharp. "Margaret talks too much. She barely said anything at all, actually. Just that her name was Isabel, and that she died, 5 years ago." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his hands flat on the table before him. Strong hands, Rosalie noticed, with calluses that spoke of hard work and a thin scar across the right knuckles. "Yes," he said finally. "You bear a resemblance. It was unexpected. Is that why you brought me here? Because I look like your dead wife?" The bluntness of the question seemed to startle him. "Partly," he admitted, "but also because you needed help, and I was in a position to provide it." "What do you expect in return?" Rosalie asked, the fear she'd been holding at bay beginning to surface. "I should tell you now, I won't—" "Nothing like that," Gabriel interrupted, his voice sharp. "I'm not Fletcher. I wouldn't—" He took a breath, visibly collecting himself. "The ranch always needs hands. Margaret could use help with the house. You'll earn your keep same as anyone else here. Room, board, and fair wages. And if I don't want to stay, then I'll take you wherever you want to go." His gaze was steady. "But I suspect your options are limited, given that the law in Silverton believes you're a murderer." It was Rosalie's turn to look away. "I didn't kill Mrs. Graves." "I believe you." The simple statement delivered without hesitation caught her off guard. "You do?" "Why," Gabriel's expression softened slightly. "I've met killers, Miss Morgan. You don't have the eyes for it." Before Rosalie could respond, the front door opened and a man entered without knocking. Tall and powerfully built, with skin the color of polished mahogany, and eyes that missed nothing. He wore practical range clothes and carried himself with quiet dignity. "Isaiah," Gabriel greeted him. "Everything all right?" "The men are asking about the north pasture," the newcomer replied, his voice deep and measured. "The creek's running high with the early snowmelt. Might flood if we get more rain." "I'll come have a look." Gabriel rose, then seemed to remember Rosalie. "Isaiah Wilson, this is Rosalie Morgan. She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Morgan, Isaiah is my ranch foreman." Isaiah's keen eyes took in Rosalie's bruised face and slender form. Something like understanding passed through his expression. "Miss Morgan." He tipped his hat. "Mr. Wilson," Rosalie replied, rising to offer her hand. If Isaiah was surprised by the gesture, he didn't show it. He shook her hand briefly, then turned back to Gabriel. "I'll tell the men you're coming." After he left, Gabriel lingered, seeming reluctant to leave Rosalie alone. "Margaret will show you around, get you settled. We can talk more this evening." Rosalie nodded, uncertain what else to say. As Gabriel reached the door, she called after him. "Thank you for last night, for believing me." He paused, his back to her. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Morgan. You might find life at the Sunrise Valley more difficult than you expect." With that cryptic statement, he was gone, leaving Rosalie to wonder exactly what kind of sanctuary she had found herself in. The day passed in a blur of new experiences. Margaret showed her around the house, explaining the routine and what would be expected of her. The ranch house was larger than it appeared from outside, with 6 bedrooms, a study, a formal dining room seldom used, and a spacious kitchen that was clearly Margaret's domain. "Gabriel takes his meals regular," Margaret explained as they folded linens in the small laundry room off the kitchen. "Breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening. The hands eat in the bunkhouse except for Isaiah, who usually joins us. There's baking to be done twice a week, cleaning daily, and mending as needed." Rosalie nodded, trying to remember everything. It was a far cry from the chaotic schedule of the Silver Spur, but no less demanding in its own way. "What about family?" she ventured, remembering Margaret's mention of Gabriel's wife. "Are there children?" Margaret's hands stilled on the sheet she was folding. "There's Emma," she said after a pause, "Gabriel and Isabel's daughter. She's 12 now." "Where is she?" Rosalie hadn't seen any sign of a child in the house. She'll be back from her ride soon. She spends most days with the horses, or exploring. Margaret's expression grew somber. Emma doesn't speak. Hasn't since the fire. Fire. Rosalie echoed a chill running through her at the word. Margaret seemed to realize she'd said too much. "It's not my place to tell Gabriel's story," she said firmly. "If he wants you to know, he'll tell you himself." The sound of the front door opening interrupted them. Light footsteps crossed the main room, followed by Margaret's call of, "Emma, come meet our guest." A moment later, a girl appeared in the doorway. Small for her age, with a wild mane of dark curls and eyes the same steel blue as her father's. She wore boy's trousers and a flannel shirt with riding boots caked in mud. She stared at Rosalie with undisguised curiosity. "Emma, this is Miss Morgan," Margaret said. "She'll be staying with us for a while, helping around the house." Rosalie smiled, careful not to show any reaction to the girl's unconventional appearance. "Hello, Emma. You can call me Rose if you like." The girl didn't respond, but her gaze was intelligent and assessing as it took in Rosalie's bruised face. After a moment, she pulled a small slate and chalk from her pocket and wrote quickly, "Did someone hurt you?" The directness of the question was startling. "Yes," Rosalie admitted, "but I'm safe now." Emma considered this, then wrote again, "My father doesn't let people hurt girls." "I'm learning that," Rosalie replied softly. The girl nodded once, apparently satisfied, then turned and disappeared as quickly as she'd come. "She's direct," Rosalie commented once Emma was gone. "She sees more than most," Margaret agreed. "Lost her voice, but not her spirit." The older woman's gaze turned speculative. "She took to you quick." "That's unusual." "Is it? She doesn't trust easily. Not since—" Margaret shook her head. "Well, not for a long time." As the afternoon wore on, Rosalie settled into the rhythm of the household. She helped Margaret prepare supper, learning where everything was kept, and how the stern housekeeper liked things done. Despite her initial reserve, Margaret was a patient teacher, and by the time the men returned from the range, Rosalie felt almost comfortable in her new surroundings. Gabriel and Isaiah came in together, deep in conversation about pasture rotation and cattle prices. They fell silent when they saw Rosalie setting the table, though Isaiah offered her a nod of greeting. Supper was a quiet affair. Emma appeared when called but didn't acknowledge her father beyond a brief nod. The girl kept her slate beside her plate, occasionally writing a question for Margaret about the day's events, but otherwise focused on her food. Gabriel ate methodically, his attention seemingly elsewhere. Several times Rosalie caught him watching her. When he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. After the meal, Margaret shooed them all from the kitchen, insisting she would handle the cleanup alone. Isaiah excused himself to check on the bunkhouse, leaving Gabriel, Rosalie, and Emma in the main room. Emma settled in a corner with a book, while Gabriel moved to his desk, sorting through papers with a distracted air. Rosalie, uncertain of her place, stood awkwardly until Gabriel finally looked up. "You're welcome to the books," he said, gesturing to the shelves. "Or there's mending if you prefer something to keep your hands busy." "Thank you." Rosalie moved to the bookshelves, scanning the titles with interest. It had been months since she'd had the luxury of reading for pleasure. "You can read?" It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." Rosalie turned a volume of Tennyson's poetry in her hands. "My mother taught me. She was a school teacher before she married my father." Something like approval flickered in Gabriel's eyes. An educated woman is a rare thing in these parts. "Some might say a dangerous thing," Rosalie replied, thinking of the suspicion her literacy had aroused in Silverton. "Some are fools." Gabriel's gaze shifted to his daughter, engrossed in her own book. "Knowledge is never the enemy." Rosalie settled into a chair near the fire, the poetry book open in her lap. But instead of reading, she found herself studying the man across the room. In the flickering light, the hard lines of his face were softened, revealing a younger man than he first appeared. There was pain there etched into the corners of his eyes and the set of his mouth, but also strength and a quiet determination. What had happened to him? To his wife? And why did he really bring Rosalie to this place? As if sensing her thoughts, Gabriel looked up, catching her gaze. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, an unspoken current passing between them. Then Emma slapped her slate on the table beside her, breaking the spell. "Time for bed," she had written. Gabriel's expression softened as he looked at his daughter. "Already?" Emma nodded firmly, then wrote "story, of course." Gabriel stood stretching slightly. "Same as always." The girl nodded again, gathering her book and slate. As she passed Rosalie, she paused, writing quickly, "You can come too." Surprised by the invitation, Rosalie glanced at Gabriel, who looked equally taken aback. After a moment, he nodded. "If you'd like." Curious, Rosalie followed them down the hall to Emma's room, a space that clearly reflected its occupant's personality. Drawings covered one wall, mostly of horses and mountain landscapes, but also darker images, flames, shadowy figures, a house burning. Books were stacked haphazardly on every surface, and a collection of rocks and feathers lined the windowsill. Emma climbed into bed, fully dressed, pulling the covers up to her chin and looking expectantly at her father. Gabriel sat on the edge of the bed, while Rosalie lingered in the doorway, feeling like an intruder on this private ritual. "Once upon a time," Gabriel began, his voice taking on a gentler cadence than Rosalie had yet heard from him, "there was a brave knight who lived in a castle high on a mountain." It was a simple tale of adventure and courage, clearly one that had been told many times before. Emma mouthed along with certain parts, her eyes heavy with approaching sleep. By the time Gabriel reached the end, the knight returning home victorious to his beloved princess, the girl was fast asleep. Gabriel tucked the covers around her more securely, then brushed a curl from her forehead with a tenderness that made Rosalie's heart ache. This was a side of him she hadn't expected, the loving father beneath the stern rancher. They left the room quietly, Gabriel pulling the door mostly closed behind them. In the hallway, he paused, looking uncomfortable. "She doesn't usually invite others to her bedtime story," he said, his voice low. "I'm honored she included me," Rosalie replied honestly. Gabriel studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the main room. "Come, there are things we should discuss." Back in the main room, Gabriel poured 2 small glasses of whiskey, offering one to Rosalie. She hesitated, then accepted it, taking a seat across from him near the fire. "Emma seems to have taken a liking to you," he said after a sip of his drink. "She's a remarkable child." "Yes," pride and sorrow mingled in the word. "She's been through more than any child should have to bear." Rosalie waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. Gabriel stared into his glass as if gathering his thoughts. 5 years ago, there was a fire at the Denver Silver Mining Company. Isabel was there picking me up after a meeting. Emma was with her. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. 37 people died. Isabel was one of them. Emma survived, but she hasn't spoken a word since. "I'm so sorry," Rosalie whispered, understanding now the pain that seemed to haunt him. The official report called it an accident. Faulty wiring in the new electric lights. Gabriel's hand tightened around his glass. But it wasn't an accident. Rosalie felt a chill at the certainty in his voice. "How do you know?" "Because I've spent 5 years investigating it." His eyes, when they met hers, burned with banked fury. The fire was set deliberately to cover up evidence of embezzlement and fraud. The men responsible are still walking free, still powerful in these parts. And that's why you're here in Silverton. Gabriel nodded slowly. I'm close to proving it. But it's dangerous knowledge. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Which is why you need to understand what you've walked into, Rosalie Morgan. This ranch isn't just a ranch, and I'm not just a rancher. Who are you, then? Rosalie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. A humorless smile touched his lips. A man seeking justice or revenge. Sometimes I'm not sure there's a difference. The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything Rosalie thought she knew about her situation. She had escaped one danger only to land in the midst of another, potentially more deadly one. Why tell me this? She asked. You don't know me. I could be anyone. True. Gabriel sat back, some of the intensity fading from his expression. But you're not. You're a woman who's been wronged, who's facing a false accusation. In that, at least, we have something in common. Rosalie considered his words, turning them over in her mind. There was truth in them, but also evasion. He still hadn't fully explained why he'd brought her here, why he'd intervened in her life so dramatically. What do you want from me, Mr. Reed? The directness of the question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. He set his empty glass aside. But I do know that you deserve better than what Fletcher had planned for you, and I know that this ranch can be a safe haven if you want it to be. Even with your investigation. Perhaps because of it. Gabriel's expression turned thoughtful. Fletcher is connected to the men I'm pursuing. Your presence here might actually be useful. As bait, you mean? Rosalie couldn't keep the edge from her voice. No. Gabriel's denial was immediate and forceful. As an ally, perhaps, but never as bait. I don't put innocent people in harm's way. Rosalie wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded anyway. What choice did she have, really? Return to Silverton and face a murder charge. Try to make her way alone, in a territory where a woman without protection was considered fair game. All right, she said finally. I'll stay, for now. Something like relief crossed Gabriel's face. Good. He stood, indicating their conversation was at an end. Margaret will help you settle in properly tomorrow. If you need anything in the meantime, my room is at the end of the hall. Rosalie rose as well, suddenly conscious of how alone they were in the quiet house. Thank you again, Mr. Reed, for everything. He nodded once, his expression closing off again. Get some rest, Miss Morgan. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As Rosalie made her way back to her room, Isabel's room, she now realized she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into a story already in progress, one with currents deeper and more dangerous than she yet understood. But for the first time in years, she also felt something else, a sense of purpose, of possibility. Whatever Gabriel Reed's true motives, whatever danger lurked in the shadow of his quest for justice, Rosalie knew one thing for certain. She was done being a victim. If staying at the Sunrise Valley Ranch meant becoming part of Gabriel's story, then perhaps it was time to start writing her own chapters as well. With that resolve firming in her mind, Rosalie closed the door to her room and prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. Life at the Sunrise Valley Ranch fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and strange to Rosalie. The days began early with chores that left her muscles aching, but her mind clear. There was comfort in the routine, feeding the chickens, helping Margaret with breakfast, learning to make bread that rose light and golden in the oven. For the first time in years, She felt useful rather than merely surviving. A week passed, then 2. The bruises on Rosalie's face faded, though sometimes she caught Gabriel looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, as if he were seeing someone else overlaid on her features. The ghost of Isabel, perhaps, hovering in the space between them. Emma proved to be both a mystery and a delight. The girl followed Rosalie around the house, watching her work with curious eyes, occasionally scribbling questions on her slate. Were you really in jail? Can you ride a horse? Do you know how to read? When Rosalie answered this last question affirmatively, Emma's eyes had lit up. She'd grabbed Rosalie's hand and pulled her to the bookshelf, pointing excitedly to a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "Read to me," she'd written. "Of course," Rosalie had replied, touched by the request. It became their ritual reading together in the afternoons when chores were done, sometimes poetry, sometimes adventure tales from Gabriel's well-stocked library. Emma listened with rapt attention, occasionally mouthing the words silently, as if testing how they might feel on her tongue. One afternoon, as Rosalie hung laundry in the crisp autumn air, she noticed Emma sitting cross-legged on the porch, drawing intently in a sketchbook. Curious, Rosalie finished her task and approached. "May I see?" she asked, gesturing to the drawing. Emma hesitated, then turned the sketchbook around. Rosalie's breath caught. The girl had drawn a house engulfed in flames, with a dark figure watching from the shadows. The details were precise and haunting, the curl of smoke, the desperation in the faces of people trapped inside. "This is very good," Rosalie said carefully. "But it's also very sad." Emma nodded, then wrote on her slate, "I dream about it sometimes." "The fire?" Rosalie asked gently. "The one your father told me about?" Another nod. "Then, after a pause, I saw a man. He started it." Rosalie felt a chill despite the afternoon sun. "Have you told your father this?" Emma's expression closed. "He doesn't believe me. Says it was the trauma making me see things." Before Rosalie could respond, hoofbeats announced a rider approaching. Both turned to see Sheriff Jenkins from Silverton pulling up to the house, his expression grim beneath his hat brim. Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. Rosalie placed a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "Go find your father," she murmured. "Tell him the sheriff is here." As Emma ran toward the barn, Rosalie straightened her apron and stepped forward to meet the lawman. "Sheriff Jenkins," she greeted him, keeping her voice steady, despite the fear churning in her stomach. "What brings you out this way?" Jenkins dismounted, eyeing her warily. "Miss Morgan, I see you've landed on your feet." "I have, thank you." Rosalie forced a smile. "Mr. Reed has been kind enough to employ me." "Has he now?" Jenkins removed his hat, revealing graying hair plastered to his scalp with sweat. "Interesting choice of help, considering." "Considering what, Sheriff?" Gabriel's voice came from behind Rosalie, calm, but with an edge of steel. He approached, wiping his hands on a rag, Emma a shadow at his heels. Jenkins's posture shifted subtly, a wariness entering his stance. "Reed, been meaning to have a word with you." "Seems you've found one." Gabriel's tone was mild, but his eyes were hard. "What can I do for you?" The sheriff glanced at Rosalie and Emma. "Might be best if we spoke privately." Gabriel nodded once. "Emma, go help Margaret with the baking. Miss Morgan, would you see to it?" Though phrased as a request, Rosalie recognized it as a dismissal. She guided Emma toward the house, feeling the tension crackling in the air behind them. Inside, Margaret was kneading bread dough, her strong hands working rhythmically. She looked up as they entered, her expression sharpening. "Jenkins is here." "Yes," Rosalie confirmed. "Gabriel sent us inside." Margaret wiped her hands on her apron, moving to the window that overlooked the yard. "That man brings nothing but trouble," she muttered. watching as Gabriel and the sheriff walked toward the corral, deep in conversation. "Do you know why he's here?" Rosalie asked, settling Emma at the table with flour and a small portion of dough to keep her occupied. "Could be any number of things," Margaret replied cryptically. "Gabriel's not exactly in the sheriff's good graces these days." "Because of his investigation," Margaret turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. "He told you about that—" "Some," Rosalie admitted. "About the fire, about his wife." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "He doesn't speak of Isabel to many. You must have made quite an impression." Rosalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I think it was more about explaining Emma's condition." Margaret turned back to the window. "Still, it's not like him to confide in a stranger." "I'm hardly a stranger now," Rosalie pointed out. "I've been here nearly 3 weeks." "True enough." Margaret's hands resumed their work on the dough. "But Gabriel's learned the hard way to be cautious with trust." Emma tapped the table to get their attention, then wrote on her flour-dusted slate, "Sheriff wants father to stop looking." Margaret and Rosalie exchanged glances. "Looking for what, sweet pea?" Margaret asked gently. "The man in black. The one who hurt Mother." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Rosalie recalled the dark figure in Emma's drawing watching the flames. Was it possible the child had actually seen the arsonist? That her mute state wasn't just trauma, but fear? The front door opened and closed, followed by Gabriel's firm footsteps. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of controlled anger. "Everything all right?" Margaret asked, though it clearly wasn't. "Fine," Gabriel replied shortly. "Jenkins was just passing along some friendly advice." "About me?" Rosalie asked, unable to stop herself. Gabriel's gaze softened slightly when it fell on her. "Partly. Fletcher has been making noise in town about his stolen property. Seems he doesn't appreciate losing an investment." "And the other part?" Margaret pressed. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "The usual. Warnings to mind my own business. Reminders about our arrangement." He spat the last word like it tasted foul. "What arrangement?" Rosalie asked. "Nothing that need concern you." Gabriel replied, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. His eyes fell on Emma, who was watching him intently. "What have you been up to, little one?" The girl held up her flour-covered hands with a silent grin, and just like that the tension in the room eased. Gabriel ruffled her hair, leaving a streak of white in the dark curls. "Looks like you're learning all Margaret's secrets," he said with a smile that transformed his face, making him look years younger. "Soon you'll be running this kitchen." Emma beamed, then wrote quickly, "Rose is teaching me Shakespeare." "Is she now?" Gabriel's gaze shifted to Rosalie, something like approval in his eyes. "She's a good teacher, then." Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Rosalie felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the heat of the oven. The moment was broken by the arrival of Isaiah, his expression serious as he addressed Gabriel. "We need to talk about the north pasture fence, and there's a matter with one of the hands I think you should know about." Gabriel nodded, the rancher's mask sliding back into place. "I'll be right there." He turned to Emma. "Help Margaret finish the bread, then wash up for dinner." As the men left, Rosalie found herself wondering about the complexities of Gabriel Reed. The grieving widower, the determined investigator, the loving father, the stern rancher, all residing in one man, each facet revealed or concealed as circumstances demanded. And now it seemed a man with secrets even beyond what he'd shared with her. What was this arrangement with the sheriff, and why was Jenkins so intent on Gabriel abandoning his investigation? The question circled in Rosalie's mind as she helped Emma shape the dough into loaves. But one thing was becoming increasingly clear. The sanctuary she had found at the Sunrise Valley Ranch came with complications she was only beginning to understand. That night, unable to sleep, Rosalie slipped from her room and made her way to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet. The only sound, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the main room and the occasional creak of timbers settling. As she passed Gabriel's study, she noticed light seeping beneath the door. On impulse, she knocked softly. "Come in," Gabriel's voice called, sounding weary. Rosalie opened the door to find him seated at his desk, surrounded by papers and maps. A single lamp cast long shadows across the room, highlighting the fatigue etched in his features. "I saw the light," she explained, hovering in the doorway. "I thought you might like some tea." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it, but Gabriel's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "That's kind, but unnecessary. You should be resting." "So should you," Rosalie countered, stepping fully into the room. Her eyes fell on the papers spread across his desk. Newspaper clippings, official-looking documents, hand-drawn maps with locations marked in red. "Is this your investigation?" Gabriel hesitated, then nodded. 5 years' worth of evidence. Names, dates, connections. A puzzle with missing pieces. Rosalie moved closer, drawn by curiosity, and something else, a desire to understand this man who had rescued her, yet remained such an enigma. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. Gabriel studied her for a moment, then inclined his head. "If you wish." Rosalie sat her gaze roaming over the scattered documents. One in particular caught her eye, a newspaper clipping about the Denver Silver Mining Company fire with a photograph of the burnt-out building. The headline read, "Tragedy claims 37 lives, foul play suspected." "Foul play was suspected from the beginning?" she asked, tapping the headline. "Briefly," Gabriel confirmed, "until money changed hands and memories grew conveniently short." "What really happened?" Gabriel leaned back in his chair, shadows deepening the lines around his eyes. The Denver Silver Mining Company was processing more silver than their official records showed. The extra was coming from illegal claims mines operating without permits on protected land. The profits were being laundered through legitimate businesses across the territory. "Including in Silverton," Rosalie guessed. "Including the Silver Spur Saloon." Gabriel nodded. "Fletcher is a small cog in a large machine, but he knows names. Names I need." "And the fire?" "There was an audit scheduled. Federal inspectors arriving the next day." Gabriel's voice hardened. "The fire destroyed all the records that would have exposed the operation, and killed the company accountant who had started asking questions." "Along with your wife," Rosalie said softly. Gabriel's hand clenched on the desk. "Along with Isabel, who was only there to pick me up after a meeting." "I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate against such loss. "Emma was with her." Gabriel continued, his gaze distant now. "They were in the waiting area when the fire started. Isabel got Emma out, then went back in for others." His voice broke slightly. "They found her near the rear exit, with 2 children she'd managed to save. She couldn't reach the door in time." Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes at the image. "She died a hero." "She died needlessly," Gabriel corrected, anger flashing in his eyes. "Murdered by men who valued profit over human life." "And you've been hunting them ever since?" "Yes." The single word held 5 years of determination and pain. Rosalie's gaze returned to the papers. Among them was a sketch of a man in a black coat, his features indistinct except for a distinctive scar that curved from temple to jaw. "Who is this?" Gabriel glanced at the drawing. The man witnesses saw leaving the building just before the fire was discovered. No one recognized him. He disappeared afterward. A memory stirred in Rosalie's mind, Emma's drawing of the burning house, the dark figure watching. Emma believes she saw someone that day, a man who started the fire. Gabriel's head snapped up. What? When did she tell you this? This afternoon. She drew a picture, a man watching the fire, and she wrote that she dreams about him. Rosalie hesitated. She also said you don't believe her. Gabriel's expression closed. Emma was traumatized. The doctors said children in such situations often create memories to make sense of their experiences. But what if she really did see something? Rosalie pressed. Children notice details adults miss, and her drawings are remarkably precise. I've considered it, Gabriel admitted. But without her voice, without her being able to describe exactly what she saw. He shook his head. It's not evidence I can use. Perhaps not in a court, Rosalie agreed. But it might give you new directions to explore. Gabriel studied her with newfound interest. You have an investigative mind, Miss Morgan. I'm observant, she corrected. It's a skill you develop when your survival depends on anticipating others' actions. Something shifted in Gabriel's gaze. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. Would you be willing to look at what I've gathered? A fresh perspective might see connections I've missed. The request surprised her. I'd be honored, she said honestly, though I'm not sure how much help I can be. Sometimes the smallest detail can break a case wide open. Gabriel gathered some of the papers into a more organized pile. But not tonight. It's late, and we both need rest. As if on cue, Rosalie stifled a yawn. You're right. I should go. She rose, but paused at the door. Mr. Reed, Gabriel, he corrected. I think we're past formalities at this point. Gabriel, she amended the name, feeling intimate on her tongue. Thank you for trusting me with this. He looked up, his expression softening in the lamplight. Thank you for asking Rosalie. Rose, she offered. My friends call me Rose. A small smile touched his lips. Good night, Rose. Good night, Gabriel. As she made her way back to her room, Rosalie felt something shift between them, a bridge forming across the chasm of their different experiences. Not friendship exactly, but the beginning of something that might someday become it. The following days brought a new dimension to Rosalie's role at the Sunrise Valley Ranch. By day, she continued her work alongside Margaret, learning the rhythms of the household and growing closer to Emma. But in the evenings after dinner, she would join Gabriel in his study, poring over the evidence he had amassed. It was painstaking work, connecting threads between seemingly unrelated events, tracking financial transactions through multiple businesses, identifying the key players in what appeared to be a vast conspiracy of corruption. The Denver Silver Mining Company was just one operation, Gabriel explained one evening, spreading a map across his desk. They had illegal claims here, here, and here. He pointed to locations marked in red, but the money flowed through businesses across the territory, saloons, general stores, even a bank in Durango. All connected to the same people, Rosalie asked, studying the pattern. 3 men at the top, Gabriel confirmed. James Collins, the mine owner. Harold Montgomery, a judge who made sure any legal complaints disappeared. And the third, he hesitated. The third man I'm still not certain of. Someone with political connections, someone powerful enough to influence territorial officials. And Fletcher, where does he fit in? Fletcher manages one of their fronts. Probably doesn't know the full extent of the operation, but he handles cash transfers, provides a venue for meetings. Gabriel's expression darkened. And he keeps certain influential men entertained when they visit Silverton. Rosalie thought of Lily and the other girls at the Silver Spur and felt sick. That's what he had planned for me. Yes, Gabriel's jaw tightened. But you escaped that fate. Thanks to you, Rosalie said softly, though I still don't fully understand why you intervened. Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the map. When I saw Fletcher hit you, he finally said, I saw Isabel. Not because you look like her, though there is a resemblance, but because she would never have stood by and watched such a thing happen. He looked up, his eyes intense. I acted as she would have wanted me to. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Rosalie felt a tightness in her chest, a complex emotion she couldn't quite name. She must have been extraordinary, she said. She was. A sad smile touched Gabriel's lips. Fearless, passionate about justice. She's the reason I can't let this go, even after 5 years. She deserves justice. And you? Rosalie asked gently. What do you deserve, Gabriel? The question seemed to catch him off guard. I don't know any more, he admitted. Peace, perhaps, though I'm not sure I'll recognize it when it comes. Before Rosalie could respond, a knock at the study door interrupted them. Margaret entered, her expression troubled. There's a rider coming, she said. Fast. Might be trouble. Gabriel was on his feet, instantly. Emma, with Isaiah in the barn. He'll keep her safe. They moved to the front porch, where the approaching rider was now visible in the fading light, a man pushing his horse hard, dust billowing behind him. One of the hands, Rosalie asked, squinting to make out details. No, Gabriel replied, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Stand back, both of you. The rider pulled up sharply at the house, his horse lathered and blowing. As he dismounted, Rosalie recognized him, one of the bartenders from the Silver Spur. Reed, the man called, approaching the porch, with his hands visible. Got a message for you. From Fletcher. Gabriel's voice was cold. Not exactly. The man glanced nervously at Rosalie. It's about the girl. Fletcher wants her to know her friends at the Spur are paying for her departure. Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean? The bartender shifted uncomfortably. Lily got roughed up pretty bad last night. Fletcher said it was a warning. Said to tell Reed that harboring fugitives has consequences. Gabriel's expression hardened to granite. Get back on your horse and deliver a message of your own. Tell Fletcher if he touches another woman in my name, he'll answer to me, Hootie, personally. And tell him Miss Morgan is under my protection now. Permanently. The man nodded clearly, intimidated. Yes, sir. I'll tell him. As he rode away, Rosalie gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white. Lily is hurt because of me. No, Gabriel said firmly. She's hurt because Fletcher is a cruel, vindictive man who uses people as pawns. This isn't your fault. But guilt churned in Rosalie's stomach nonetheless. She thought of Lily's tired eyes, her kindness in the jail cell, her patient instruction on surviving at the saloon. We have to help her. Them. All of them. We will, Gabriel promised. But not by rushing in half-cocked. Fletcher is baiting us, trying to draw us out. Why? Margaret asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. What's changed? Gabriel's gaze met Rosalie's, understanding passing between them. Fletcher knows I'm getting close, he said. He's feeling pressure from above to clean up loose ends. And Rose is a loose end, a witness who knows too much about his operation. I don't know anything useful, Rosalie protested. You kept his books, Gabriel reminded her. Even if you didn't understand what you were recording, you've seen names, amounts, dates. That makes you dangerous." The implications settled over Rosalie like a shroud. She wasn't just a fugitive from a murder accusation anymore. She was a target in a conspiracy that had already claimed dozens of lives. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "We continue our work," Gabriel replied. "But carefully. No trips to town for either of us for a while. And we accelerate our investigation. It's time to bring this to an end." Margaret shook her head, concern etched in the lines of her face. "Gabriel, be careful. These men have already taken so much from us." "Which is precisely why they must be stopped," he replied, his voice like iron. "Before they destroy more lives." Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Rosalie stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit valley. The peace of the scene belied the danger that now seemed to surround them, all danger she had inadvertently brought to this household. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Emma barefoot in her nightgown, her slate clutched in her hands. "Couldn't sleep," the girl had written. "Bad dreams." "Come in," Rosalie said softly, opening her door wider. "I couldn't sleep either." Emma padded to the window, looking out at the same view that had captivated Rosalie. After a moment, she wrote, "Are you going to leave us?" The question pierced Rosalie's heart. Why would you think that people always leave when it gets dangerous? Mother left. Understanding dawned. "Emma, your mother didn't leave by choice. She was very brave, saving you and those other children." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She wrote shakily, "I know, but you could choose to go before the bad men come." Rosalie knelt before the girl, taking her small hands in her own. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Your father and I are working together to stop the bad men. And when we do, everyone will be safer." Emma studied her face, searching for truth. Finally, she nodded, seeming satisfied. She wrote a new message. "Can I stay with you tonight, just until I fall asleep?" "Of course you can." Rosalie led her to the bed, tucking her in, as she had seen Gabriel do. "Would you like me to read to you?" Emma shook her head, then wrote, "Tell me a story. About you, before." Rosalie settled beside her, considering what parts of her past were suitable for a child's ears. "Well, I grew up on a farm near Denver. We had horses and cows and a vegetable garden that my mother was very proud of. In the summers, my father would take me fishing in the creek that ran through our property." She spoke softly of her childhood of simple joys and everyday adventures, carefully avoiding the tragedy that had ended that chapter of her life. Gradually, Emma's eyelids grew heavy, and soon she was asleep, her small face peaceful in the moonlight. Rosalie remained beside her, watching over her sleep. In that moment, she made a silent vow to protect this child, to help her father find justice, to be worthy of the trust they had placed in her. Whatever came next, she would face it with courage. For Emma, for Gabriel, and for herself. The next morning dawned with an unexpected visitor. Rosalie was collecting eggs from the henhouse when she heard the crunch of carriage wheels on the drive. Peering around the corner of the building, she saw an elegant buggy pull up to the house, driven by a smartly dressed man she didn't recognize. Curious, she finished her task and made her way back to the kitchen where Margaret was already preparing breakfast. "We have a visitor," Rosalie reported, setting the basket of eggs on the table. "Judge Montgomery," Margaret replied, without looking up from the stove. "I saw him from the window." The judge, Rosalie recalled the name from Gabriel's investigation, one of the three men at the center of the conspiracy. "What is he doing here?" "Playing his part," Margaret said cryptically. as he has for years. Before Rosalie could ask for clarification, the kitchen door opened and Gabriel entered, followed by a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. Tall and imperiously thin, with silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard, Judge Harold Montgomery carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference. "Margaret," he greeted the housekeeper with a nod. "Still making the best coffee in the territory, I trust?" "Judge," Margaret replied coolly, not bothering to answer his question. Montgomery's sharp eyes turned to Rosalie, assessing her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "And this must be the young lady I've been hearing about. Miss Morgan, is it not?" Rosalie straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "Yes, sir." "Rose is helping Margaret with the household," Gabriel explained, his voice carefully neutral. "She's also teaching Emma to read Shakespeare." "How civilizing," Montgomery commented with a thin smile. "Though I understand her previous employment was somewhat less refined." The implied insult hung in the air, but Rosalie refused to rise to the bait. "I'm grateful for the opportunity Mr. Reed has provided," she said simply. "Yes, Gabriel has always had a soft spot for strays," Montgomery replied, his tone making the observation into something unpleasant. "Though this time I fear his charity may have led him astray. You are aware, Miss Morgan, that you're still wanted for questioning in Silverton regarding a fatal fire." "I'm aware of the accusation," Rosalie replied steadily, "and of my innocence." "Innocence is such a subjective concept," the judge mused. "In my experience, few are truly innocent, merely varying degrees of guilty." "Was there a purpose to your visit, Judge?" Gabriel interrupted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Beyond harassing my staff," Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed, a matter of business I'd prefer to discuss privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of Rose and Margaret," Gabriel countered. "As you wish." The judge removed his gloves, one finger at a time. "I've come about your continued inquiries into certain matters we've previously discussed. It has come to my attention that you've been asking questions in Denver again. Questions about the mine fire." "It's a free territory," Gabriel replied evenly. "A man can ask questions if he chooses." "Of course, but wise men know when to let sleeping dogs lie." Montgomery's voice hardened. 5 years is a long time to nurse a grudge, Gabriel. Even one as personal as yours. Is that what you think this is? A grudge? What else would you call this obsession with reopening old wounds? The official investigation concluded years ago. It was a tragedy, certainly, but accidents happen in mining operations. Rosalie watched Gabriel carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained despite the provocation. "Is that what you told the families of the 37 victims?" he asked quietly. "That accidents happen." A flash of something fear crossed Montgomery's face before his mask of civility slipped back into place. "I understand your loss, Gabriel. Truly, I do. Isabel was a remarkable woman, but she would not want you destroying yourself with this crusade." "Don't presume to tell me what my wife would want," Gabriel warned, his voice dropping dangerously. Montgomery sighed as if dealing with a recalcitrant child. "Very well, let me be direct. Certain individuals are becoming concerned about your activities. Individuals who helped you acquire this ranch at a very favorable price after its previous owner's unfortunate departure." Rosalie felt a chill at the implied threat. She glanced at Margaret, who was watching the exchange with thinly veiled hostility. "Are you threatening me, Harold?" Gabriel asked, his tone conversational, despite the steel beneath it. "Merely reminding you of our arrangement," Montgomery replied smoothly. "You were granted certain considerations in exchange for your discretion. That arrangement has been mutually beneficial. It would be a shame to see it end. Would it? Gabriel's smile was cold. Because, from where I stand, the arrangement looks increasingly one-sided. Montgomery's eyes narrowed. Careful, Gabriel. You have more to lose than you might think. His gaze slid meaningfully to Rosalie. And now it seems more hostages to fortune. Threats don't become you, Harold. Not threats. Warnings from a concerned friend. Montgomery retrieved his gloves. Consider your next moves carefully, for everyone's sake. After the judge departed, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Rosalie's mind raced with implications. The arrangement Gabriel had mentioned to the sheriff, it involved Montgomery clearly. But what exactly had Gabriel agreed to, and what had he received in return? You never mentioned the ranch was part of their operation, she said quietly. Gabriel's face was a study in controlled fury. Because it isn't. Not anymore. But it was, Rosalie pressed. The previous owner was one of their associates, Gabriel admitted. When he died supposedly in a hunting accident, Montgomery arranged for me to buy the property at half its value. Why? To keep me quiet, to give me something to focus on besides the investigation. Gabriel's laugh was bitter. They thought I'd be so grateful for the opportunity that I'd let Isabel's death go unpunished. But you didn't. No, I took their gift and used it against them. The Sunrise Valley became my base of operations, a place where I could work undisturbed, gather evidence, build my case. And they let you— Rosalie found that hard to believe. They underestimated me, Gabriel replied. Thought I was just a grieving widower playing at detective. By the time they realized I was serious, I had already accumulated too much evidence to be easily silenced. So they settled for monitoring you instead, Rosalie guessed. Having the sheriff check in, sending Montgomery to issue friendly warnings. Yes, but the balance is shifting. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. Montgomery wouldn't have come in person unless they were truly concerned. We're getting close to something they don't want found. Or someone, Margaret interjected, speaking for the first time since the judge's departure. That man knows who set the fire. I'd stake my life on it. Rosalie thought of Emma's drawing the dark figure watching the flames. Do you think it could have been Montgomery himself? No, Gabriel shook his head. He's too cautious, too concerned with appearances. He would have hired someone. The man in the sketch, Rosalie realized. The one with the scar. Exactly. Gabriel's expression turned thoughtful. And Montgomery's visit gives me an idea of where to look next. He mentioned Denver specifically. Someone there must have talked. You're not thinking of going to Denver? Margaret asked, alarm evident in her voice. Not yet, Gabriel assured her. But I need to send a telegram. Isaiah can take it when he goes to town for supplies tomorrow. As Gabriel left to write his message, Margaret turned to Rosalie, her expression grave. He's playing a dangerous game, she said softly. These men have already killed once to protect their secrets. They won't hesitate to do so again. I know, Rosalie replied, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. But we can't let them win, not after everything they've taken. Margaret studied her with new respect. You're not what I expected, Rosalie Morgan. What did you expect? Someone weaker, someone who would run at the first sign of trouble. Margaret's weathered face softened. I'm glad to be wrong. The older woman's approval warmed Rosalie, but also deepened her sense of commitment. She was no longer just a guest at the Sunrise Valley Ranch. She was part of this fight for justice, bound to Gabriel and his cause by choice rather than circumstance. And if that put her in danger, So be it. Some things were worth the risk. 3 days later, Rosalie sat on the porch steps watching Emma sketch the mountains in the distance. The girl had a remarkable eye for detail, capturing the play of light and shadow across the rugged peaks with a skill that belied her 12 years. Gabriel had been unusually quiet since Montgomery's visit, spending long hours in his study and riding the boundaries of the ranch with a vigilance that spoke of anticipated trouble. The telegram he'd sent to Denver had received a cryptic reply, "Information available, not for paper. Send trusted messenger." Isaiah had volunteered to make the journey, but Gabriel had refused, unwilling to leave the ranch without its foreman. The impasse had left them all on edge, waiting for a solution that remained elusive. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Rosalie's attention. A rider was coming up the drive, not at the breakneck pace of the bartender from days before, but with the steady rhythm of someone who knew where they were going. As the figure drew closer, Rosalie tensed, recognizing the Silver Spur's distinctive blue dress. "Emma, go inside," she said quietly. "Find your father." The girl looked up, following Rosalie's gaze. Her eyes widened, but she gathered her sketching materials without argument and hurried into the house. Rosalie stood bracing herself as the rider approached. To her surprise, she recognized not one of Fletcher's girls, but Lily herself, looking pale and determined beneath a borrowed hat. "Lily," Rosalie called, scarcely believing her eyes. "What are you doing here?" The older woman reined in her horse, wincing slightly as she dismounted. Up close, Rosalie could see the evidence of Fletcher's warning, a fading bruise on her cheekbone, a split lip, only partially healed. "Had to see for myself that you were all right," Lily said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "And to warn you, Fletcher knows about the telegram." Alarm shot through Rosalie. "How?" "He's got ears everywhere. Paid the telegraph operator to make copies of all messages to and from the Sunrise Valley." Lily glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I shouldn't be here. If he finds out—" "Come inside," Rosalie urged, taking the reins of Lily's horse. "You're safe now." The front door opened, and Gabriel appeared, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. His expression changed from wariness to surprise when he recognized Lily. "Miss Lily Turner," the woman supplied, straightening despite her obvious discomfort. "I worked with Rose at the Spur." "She's come to warn us," Rosalie explained quickly. "Fletcher knows about the telegram." Gabriel's face darkened. "Inside, both of you, now." In the kitchen, Margaret quickly set about tending to Lily's injuries, while Rosalie explained the situation. Gabriel listened in grim silence, his fingers drumming a restless tattoo on the table. "How did you get away from the saloon?" he asked Lily when Rosalie finished. "Fletcher is in Denver until tomorrow," Lily replied, wincing as Margaret applied witch hazel to her split lip. "Meeting with some important men," he said. "Left his doorman in charge." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "Man's always had a weakness for my apple pie. I slipped him some sleeping powder from Margaret's kitchen, borrowed his horse while he was napping." "You're taking an awful risk," Gabriel observed. "Why?" Lily's gaze shifted to Rosalie. "Because she was kind to me when most aren't, and because I'm tired of watching Fletcher hurt people." She hesitated, then added, "And because I know things that might help you with your investigation." Gabriel's attention sharpened. "What things?" "Fletcher keeps a lockbox in his office, secret compartment under the floorboards." Lily's voice lowered. "I've seen him put papers in it, important ones from the way he handles them. And I've heard names: Montgomery Collins and another, a man Fletcher calls the Colonel." Gabriel and Rosalie exchanged glances. The third man, the one whose identity had eluded them. "Do you know who this colonel is?" Gabriel asked. Lily shook her head. "Never seen him, but Fletcher is scared of him, real scared, and he's coming to Silverton next week. Some big meeting at the Silver Spur." "All three of them in one place," Gabriel murmured, his mind clearly racing with possibilities, "and Fletcher's lockbox might contain the evidence we need to expose them all." "Gabriel," Margaret warned, "you're not thinking of breaking into the Silver Spur." "That's exactly what I'm thinking." His eyes gleamed with purpose. "With Fletcher in Denver, this might be our best chance to get those papers." "It's too dangerous," Rosalie protested. "The place is never empty, and after what happened with me, they'll be on guard against you." "They'll be expecting me," Gabriel agreed. "But not you." Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face as his meaning became clear. "You want me to go back there?" "Not alone," he assured her quickly. "I'll be with you every step. But you know the layout, the routines. You could get us in and out without raising suspicion." "It's suicide," Margaret declared flatly. "For both of you." "It's our best chance," Gabriel countered. "With concrete evidence, we could go to the territorial governor, bypass Montgomery's influence entirely." Lily cleared her throat. "There's another problem. Fletcher'll know I'm gone by now. He's got men watching the roads. If you go to town, you'll be walking into a trap." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen as they absorbed this new complication. Rosalie's mind raced, weighing options, risks, possibilities. "What if," she began slowly, "what if we didn't go to the Silver Spur at all? What if we went to Denver instead?" Gabriel frowned. "Denver. You said your contact there has information, but it's too sensitive for a telegram. And Fletcher is in Denver now, which means he's not at the saloon to recognize me." Rosalie's confidence grew as she spoke. "We could kill two birds with one stone, meet your contact, and follow Fletcher to identify the colonel." Gabriel studied her with growing respect. "It's risky. Denver is a big city. Finding Fletcher would be like looking for a needle in a haystack." "Not if we know where to start," Lily interjected. "Fletcher always stays at the Windsor Hotel when he's in Denver. Says it makes him feel important to rub elbows with the rich folks." "And your contact," Rosalie pressed Gabriel. "Where would you meet them?" "The Denver Press Club," Gabriel replied thoughtfully. "It's where Isabel used to work as a journalist. The editor there, Martin Reynolds, was her mentor. He's the one who sent the telegram." The pieces were falling into place. Rosalie could see the plan taking shape in Gabriel's eyes, the strategic mind behind the rancher's facade coming to the fore. "We'd need to leave immediately," he said more to himself than the others. "Take the train from Grand Junction. We could be in Denver by tomorrow night." "What about Emma?" Margaret asked, the practical concern cutting through Gabriel's planning. "And the ranch. Isaiah can handle the ranch," Gabriel replied. "And Emma," he hesitated, clearly torn. "Emma stays here with you, where it's safe." "She won't like that," Margaret warned. "Being left behind again." Gabriel's expression softened with pain. "I know, but I can't put her in danger. Not again." "And me?" Lily asked quietly. "Fletcher will kill me if he finds me." "You'll stay here too," Gabriel decided, "at least until we return. The Sunrise Valley is remote enough that Fletcher's men are unlikely to search here, especially if they believe we've fled in another direction." The plan was taking shape, dangerous, but with a clear purpose. Rosalie felt a mix of fear and determination rising within her. This was no longer just about her own safety, her own future. It was about justice for Isabel, for the other victims of the fire. It was about protecting Emma from the shadows that haunted her dreams. and it was about standing beside Gabriel in his quest, not because she owed him for her rescue, but because it was the right thing to do. "When do we leave?" she asked, her decision made. Gabriel's eyes met hers, gratitude and concern mingling in their steel-blue depths. "As soon as we can pack. We'll take the south trail to avoid the main road." As the others dispersed to prepare, Gabriel caught Rosalie's arm gently. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "It's not your fight." Rosalie looked up at him, seeing beyond the hard exterior to the man beneath. A man who had carried the weight of grief and the burden of justice alone for too long. "It became my fight the day you brought me here," she replied simply. "I'm coming with you, Gabriel, all the way to the end." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, certainly, but also something warmer. Something that made Rosalie's heart beat faster despite the danger that lay ahead. "All right, then," he said softly. "Together." The word hung between them, a promise and a pact. Whatever awaited them in Denver, they would face it side by side. And for the first time since her parents' death, Rosalie felt the solid ground of belonging beneath her feet. She was no longer adrift, no longer alone. She had found her place, not just at the Sunrise Valley Ranch, but at Gabriel's side in the cause that had become their shared purpose. As she hurried to her room to pack, Rosalie caught sight of Emma watching from the hallway, her dark eyes solemn with understanding beyond her years. The girl held out her slate, on which she had written a single word: promise. Rosalie knew what she was asking, not just a promise to return, but a promise to bring her father back safely, to not become another person who disappeared from Emma's life. "I promise," Rosalie said firmly, "we'll come back to you, both of us." Emma nodded once, then turned and disappeared into her room. Rosalie continued to her own chamber, the weight of that promise settling alongside her determination. It was a promise she intended to keep no matter what dangers Denver might hold. The train to Denver clattered along the tracks, its rhythmic motion lulling most passengers into dozing. But Rosalie remained alert, watching the passing landscape transform from rugged mountains to rolling foothills. Beside her, Gabriel sat with his hat pulled low, one hand resting casually near his holster, a man prepared for trouble, even in repose. They had departed the Sunrise Valley Ranch at dawn the previous day, taking the South Trail as planned to avoid Fletcher's men on the main road. The journey to Grand Junction had been arduous but uneventful, and they'd boarded the eastbound train with a sense of cautious optimism. Now, as sunset painted the Colorado sky in shades of crimson and gold, Denver loomed on the horizon, a sprawling testament to ambition and industry nestled at the foot of the mountains. "Have you been back since?" Rosalie let the question trail off, unsure how to reference the tragedy that had so shaped Gabriel's life. "Twice," he replied, his voice low. "For the official inquest, and again, a year later, to speak with potential witnesses." His jaw tightened. Neither visit was productive. Rosalie studied his profile, noting the tension that seemed to increase with every mile closer to the city. "What's our plan once we arrive?" "Find lodgings first. Somewhere modest, but respectable where we won't draw attention." Gabriel's gaze remained fixed on the passing landscape. "Tomorrow morning, I'll meet with Reynolds at the press club, while you watch the Windsor Hotel. If Fletcher follows his usual pattern, he'll take breakfast in the dining room around 8. And if I see him, follow at a distance. See who he meets where he goes, but do not approach him or let him see you." Gabriel turned to her, then his eyes intense. "Promise me, Rose. No unnecessary risks." "I promise," she assured him, though they both knew their entire venture was one enormous risk. "What about you? What do you expect to learn from Reynolds? Names, dates, confirmation of connections I've only been able to guess at. Gabriel's voice dropped even lower. Reynolds has sources throughout the city. If anyone knows the identity of the colonel, it would be him. As the train pulled into Denver's Union Station, they gathered their modest luggage, a single carpet bag for Rosalie and a weathered leather satchel for Gabriel. The platform bustled with activity travelers rushing in all directions, porters calling for fares, reuniting families embracing. Amidst the chaos, Rosalie felt unexpectedly vulnerable. The city's noise and movement were overwhelming after weeks at the quiet ranch, and the knowledge that danger could lurk in any shadow set her nerves on edge. Gabriel seemed to sense her discomfort. His hand found the small of her back, a steady presence, guiding her through the crowd. "Stay close," he murmured. "We'll find a cab." They secured a room at a modest hotel 6 blocks from the Windsor, close enough for observation, but far enough to avoid accidental encounters. The clerk raised no eyebrows when Gabriel signed the register as Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Wilson, merely handing over a key with bored efficiency. Their room was small but clean, with a double-bed washstand and window overlooking a side street. Rosalie stood awkwardly near the door as Gabriel checked the window locks and drew the curtains. "I can sleep on the floor," he offered, acknowledging the unspoken tension. "Don't be ridiculous," Rosalie replied more briskly than she intended. "The bed is large enough for both of us. We're adults." A faint smile touched Gabriel's lips. "As you wish." They settled into an unspoken routine, each taking turns at the washstand, carefully maintaining a respectful distance. Rosalie changed into her nightgown behind a makeshift screen of a blanket hung over a chair, acutely aware of Gabriel's presence on the other side. When they finally lay side by side in the darkness, a careful foot of space between them, Rosalie found herself strangely alert, despite her exhaustion. "What was she like?" she asked suddenly. "Isabel, not just as your wife, but as a person." The bed shifted as Gabriel turned toward her, though in the darkness she could barely make out his features. "Fearless," he said after a long pause. "Brilliant. Stubborn as the day is long." A soft chuckle escaped him. "She was a journalist before we married, specialized in exposing corruption and fraud. That's how we met. I was a deputy marshal investigating a land swindle she was reporting on." "You loved her very much," Rosalie observed. "I did." The simple admission carried years of grief in its wake. "She changed my life, made me see beyond the letter of the law to the spirit of justice." "She sounds remarkable." She was. Gabriel was quiet for a moment. "Emma is so much like her. The same determination, the same sharp mind. Sometimes it's like seeing Isabel's ghost in her expressions." Rosalie thought of the solemn girl with her slate and her haunting drawings. "Emma is extraordinary in her own right. She sees things others miss." "Yes?" Prudden mixed with pain in the word. "The doctors say she may never speak again, that the trauma of that day—" He trailed off. "Trauma doesn't have to be permanent," Rosalie said gently. "I've seen her progress just in the short time I've been at the ranch. She's healing, Gabriel." "I hope so." His voice was barely audible. "I couldn't save Isabel. But Emma, I have to believe I can help her find her way back." The vulnerability in his confession touched something deep in Rosalie's heart. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them, finding his hand in the darkness. His fingers curled around hers, warm and calloused. "You're not alone in this," she whispered. "Not anymore." Gabriel's grip tightened briefly. "Get some rest, Rose. Tomorrow will come early enough." Though he released her hand, something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a bridge across the careful distance they had maintained. Rosalie closed her eyes, and despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the dangers that awaited them, sleep found her quickly. Morning arrived with the bustle of a city awakening. Rosalie dressed carefully in her most presentable attire, a navy blue dress with modest trim that Margaret had altered to fit her. With her hair arranged neatly and a borrowed pair of gloves, she looked the part of a respectable lady taking breakfast at a fine hotel. Gabriel, too, had transformed himself, trading his range clothes for a well-cut suit that emphasized his broad shoulders. With his beard trimmed and hair neatly combed, he looked every inch the successful businessman. "You clean up well, Mr. Reed," Rosalie observed, adjusting her hat. "As do you, Miss Morgan." His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "You remember the plan. Watch Fletcher at the Windsor. Note who he meets where he goes. Return here by noon." Rosalie recited their arrangement. "And you'll meet Reynolds at the Press Club at 9. Gabriel nodded, checking his pocket watch. "If anything seems wrong, anything at all, leave immediately and come back here. Don't take chances." "I won't," she promised. "Be careful yourself." They parted ways outside the hotel, Gabriel heading east toward the Press Club, while Rosalie made her way to the Grand Windsor Hotel. The imposing structure dominated its block, 5 stories of red brick and white stone with elaborate ironwork balconies and an imposing entrance flanked by uniformed doormen. Rosalie approached with confident steps, nodding to the doorman as if she belonged. Inside the lobby gleamed with polished marble and mahogany crystal chandeliers, casting prismatic light across tasteful furnishings. She made her way to the dining room, requesting a table with a good view of the entrance. The maitre d' seated her with a flourish, and Rosalie ordered coffee and toast more as an excuse to linger than from appetite. Her nerves were too tightly wound for hunger, her senses alert for any sign of Fletcher. At precisely 8 o'clock, he appeared. Victor Fletcher strode into the dining room as if he owned it, his expensive suit and gold watch chain advertising his prosperity. He took a table near the window, ordering with the casual arrogance of a man accustomed to deference. Rosalie kept her face partially hidden behind the morning newspaper she'd picked up in the lobby, watching Fletcher over its edge. He ate alone, occasionally checking his pocket watch with obvious impatience. Whoever he was meeting was late. 20 minutes passed before Fletcher's demeanor changed. He straightened in his chair, a deferential smile replacing his scowl, as he rose to greet someone approaching from behind Rosalie. She fought the urge to turn and look instead, using the reflection in the window to catch a glimpse of the newcomer. A tall man in an immaculate military uniform, his bearing rigid with authority, and his silver hair suggesting age, but not weakness. A distinguished face weathered by sun and wind, with a neatly trimmed mustache and cold eyes that missed nothing. Fletcher pulled out a chair for the officer with an obsequiousness that would have been comical if not so telling. This, then, must be the colonel, the third man in the conspiracy, the one whose identity had eluded Gabriel for 5 years. Rosalie strained to hear their conversation, but the dining room's murmur of voices and clatter of silverware made it impossible from her position. She would need to get closer. Signaling for her check, she paid quickly and made her way to a settee in the lobby, positioned within earshot of the dining room entrance. There she pretended to read her newspaper while listening intently. "Arrangements complete?" the colonel was asking as they eventually emerged from the dining room. "Yes, sir," Fletcher replied, his usual bluster subdued in the older man's presence. "Everything will be ready for the meeting on Friday. Judge Montgomery has confirmed his attendance. And Collins, arriving tomorrow from San Francisco." The colonel nodded, apparently satisfied. "The documents, secure as you instructed." Fletcher lowered his voice. "Though there's been a complication." The girl from the saloon, Morgan. She's with Reed now." The colonel's expression hardened. "I warned Montgomery about Reed years ago. The man should have been dealt with after the fire." "Yes, sir, but the judge thought he could be controlled." "Evidently not." The colonel's tone was ice. "Handle it, Fletcher, permanently, after the meeting." "Both of them," Fletcher clarified, a hint of eagerness in his voice. "Both, and the child as well, if necessary. No loose ends." Rosalie felt the blood drain from her face. They were planning to kill not just Gabriel, but her and Emma too. And the meeting, all three conspirators would be together at the Silver Spur on Friday, just as Lily had said. She needed to find Gabriel immediately. But as she rose to leave, her newspaper slipped from her hands, the rustling pages drawing the colonel's sharp gaze. Recognition flashed in his eyes as they locked with hers. Though they had never met, something in her face, or bearing, must have betrayed her, for his expression shifted from surprise to cold calculation in an instant. "Fletcher," he said quietly, "isn't that the girl you were just describing?" Fletcher turned, his eyes widening as he spotted Rosalie. "Well, I'll be damned. It is." Rosalie didn't wait for more. Abandoning all pretense, she hurried toward the hotel's side entrance, heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Fletcher call for the doorman to stop her, but she was already through the door and into the street. She ran, skirts gathered in one hand, dodging pedestrians and carriages with desperate agility. A glance over her shoulder confirmed her fear Fletcher was in pursuit, his face contorted with rage. Rosalie ducked into an alley, then another, trying to lose him in the maze of side streets. But Fletcher knew Denver far better than she did, and she soon found herself in a dead end, a brick wall blocking her escape. She turned to face her pursuer, backing against the wall as Fletcher advanced, his breath coming in angry bursts. "Thought you were clever, didn't you?" he snarled. "Spying on us, running back to Reed with what you heard." "People know where I am," Rosalie warned, her voice steadier than she felt. "If anything happens to me, save it." Fletcher cut her off. "You're coming with me. The colonel has questions for you." As he reached for her, Rosalie remembered something Gabriel had taught her during their journey, a simple defense for a woman cornered. She drove her knee upward with all her strength, connecting solidly with Fletcher's groin. He doubled over with a howl of pain, and Rosalie darted past him back toward the alley entrance. But Fletcher, despite his agony, managed to grab her skirt, yanking her backward with enough force to tear the fabric. "Bitch!" he gasped, still clutching his injury with one hand, while maintaining his grip on her with the other. "You'll pay for that." Rosalie struggled, twisting in his grasp, but Fletcher's strength was superior to hers. As he pulled her closer, she saw the gleam of a knife in his free hand. "The colonel said to handle you," Fletcher growled. "Didn't specify you had to be breathing when I brought you to him." Rosalie felt fear crystallize into cold clarity. She would not die in this alley, not at the hands of this vicious man, not before warning Gabriel of the danger to Emma. As Fletcher raised the knife, Rosalie grabbed his wrist with both hands, using his own momentum to drive the blade away from her and toward the brick wall. The impact jarred the weapon from his grasp, sending it clattering to the ground. Fletcher snarled in frustration, his free hand closing around her throat. Spots danced before Rosalie's eyes as she clawed at his fingers, struggling for breath. A shot rang out deafeningly loud in the confined space of the alley. Fletcher's grip went slack, his eyes widening in shock as he staggered backward, clutching his shoulder, where blood blossomed through his expensive coat. "Step away from her," came a familiar voice, cold and deadly as a mountain winter. Gabriel stood at the alley entrance, his revolver steady in his hand, smoke still curling from its barrel. Behind him stood another man, older, bespectacled, with the ink-stained fingers of a lifelong journalist. Fletcher backed away from Rosalie, his face contorted with pain and rage. "Read," he spat, "always interfering where you're not wanted." "On the contrary," Gabriel replied, advancing slowly. "I'm exactly where I need to be." He glanced at Rosalie, concern flashing briefly across his face. "Are you all right?" She nodded, one hand at her throat, where Fletcher's fingers had left their mark. "He knows. They both do. The Colonel, Colonel Victor Prescott." The older man behind Gabriel supplied his voice, carrying the precise diction of a career newsman. Formerly of the 7th Cavalry, now a special advisor to mining interests throughout the territory. Fletcher's eyes darted between them, calculating his chances. Despite his injury, he lunged suddenly for the dropped knife, only to freeze as Gabriel's revolver swung toward him. "Don't," Gabriel warned. "I've waited 5 years for justice, Fletcher. Don't make me settle for revenge instead." Something in his tone must have convinced Fletcher of his sincerity, for the saloon owner slumped against the wall, defeat written in every line of his body. "What now, Reed?" he asked, blood seeping between the fingers pressed to his wound. "You can't kill me in cold blood, not with witnesses. And if you turn me over to the law, the Colonel will have me silenced before I ever reach a courtroom." "We don't need your testimony," the older man Reynolds Rosalie presumed said, stepping forward. "We have documentation linking you, Montgomery, and Prescott to both the illegal mining operations and the fire at the Denver Silver Mining Company." Fletcher's eyes widened. "Impossible. Those records were destroyed." "Not all of them," Reynolds countered. "Isabel Reed was thorough in her investigations. She kept copies of everything she discovered, copies that were safely stored at the press club, not at the mining company." "You're bluffing," Fletcher accused, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Reynolds removed a folded document from his jacket. "This is a copy of a letter from Judge Montgomery to Colonel Prescott, dated 1 week before the fire, discussing the need to eliminate the accountant problem before the federal inspectors arrived." He tucked the paper away again. "There's more. Much more." Fletcher's face had gone ashen, whether from blood loss or the realization that his position was untenable. "What do you want from me?" "The name of the man who set the fire," Gabriel said without hesitation. "The man with the scar." A flicker of surprise crossed Fletcher's features. "How did you—" "My daughter saw him," Gabriel cut him off. "She's been drawing his face for 5 years. Who is he?" Fletcher swallowed hard, his gaze shifting between Gabriel's implacable expression and the steady aim of his revolver. "Jericho Smith," he finally said, "ex-soldier turned hired gun. The Colonel brought him in for special jobs. Where is he now?" "Don't know. Haven't seen him since it happened." Fletcher winced as he shifted position. "The Colonel paid him off, sent him away. Mexico, maybe." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "And the meeting on Friday at the Silver Spur?" Fletcher looked genuinely startled now. "How did you answer the question?" Gabriel interrupted, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Final arrangements for the new operation in Silverton," Fletcher admitted. "Expanding the processing facilities, bringing in new investors. The Colonel's arranged for territorial approvals, Montgomery's handling the legal end, and Collins is providing the capital." Reynolds was scribbling notes as Fletcher spoke, recording each damning detail. Rosalie watched the saloon owner's face, noting the calculation still present, despite his apparent cooperation. "He's lying about Smith," she said suddenly, certainty filling her. "Or at least not telling the whole truth." Both men looked at her in surprise. Fletcher's expression darkened. "What would you know about it, girl?" "I know Emma's drawings," Rosalie replied steadily. "I know the man she saw was wearing a distinctive coat, long black with silver buttons, military style." She looked directly at Fletcher, like the one Colonel Prescott was wearing today. Fletcher's reaction, a flicker of panic quickly suppressed, confirmed her suspicion. "It was Prescott himself," she concluded. "He set the fire, didn't he? Not some hired gun." "Clever girl," Fletcher muttered, then louder, "What does it matter now? You've got what you wanted. Evidence names the whole operation." "It matters," Gabriel said, his voice dangerously soft, "because my wife died in that fire. Because my daughter hasn't spoken a word since she watched her mother die. It matters because justice isn't just about stopping your operation, it's about accountability for every life destroyed." A tense silence fell over the alley, broken only by the distant sounds of the city going about its business, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its shadows. "We need to get him to a doctor," Reynolds finally said, gesturing to Fletcher's wound. "Then to the federal marshal's office. They'll need his statement." Gabriel nodded slowly, though his eyes remained fixed on Fletcher with an intensity that made Rosalie shiver. "And Prescott. He saw Rose. He knows we're in Denver. My assistant is already delivering our evidence to Marshal Thompson," Reynolds assured him. "With luck, Prescott will be in custody before nightfall." But Fletcher's bitter laugh suggested otherwise. "You don't know the Colonel," he said. "By now he's already covering his tracks. He'll be gone from the Windsor, all connections to him erased. And he'll be hunting you both." The chilling certainty in his voice sent ice through Rosalie's veins. She moved closer to Gabriel, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Then we need to move quickly," Gabriel decided. "Reynolds, can you handle Fletcher? Get him to the marshal, secure his testimony." The journalist nodded. "Consider it done. What about you two? We're going back to Silverton, now." Gabriel's expression was grim. "If Prescott is running, that's where he'll go first to clean up loose ends before disappearing for good." "Emma," Rosalie breathed, understanding immediately. "And Margaret and Lily." "Exactly." Gabriel holstered his revolver, his decision made. "The next train leaves in an hour. We'll be on it." As they left Fletcher in Reynolds's custody and hurried back toward their hotel to collect their belongings, Rosalie felt fear claw at her throat. Not for herself, but for the child waiting at the Sunrise Valley Ranch, unaware of the danger rushing toward her. "We'll make it in time," Gabriel said, seeming to read her thoughts. "We have to." The grim determination in his voice matched the resolve hardening in Rosalie's heart. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. For Emma. For justice. For the future that suddenly seemed both precious and precarious. The return journey to Silverton was a blur of anxiety and determination. They traveled without rest, taking the train as far as it would go, then hiring horses for the final leg through terrain too rugged for rail lines. Throughout, Gabriel was a study in controlled urgency, his face set in lines of fierce concentration. He spoke little, but his hand often found Rosalie's in silent reassurance, though whether he was comforting her or himself, she couldn't be sure. They reached the outskirts of Silverton as dusk was falling 2 days later, the town's lights twinkling in the valley below them. Gabriel reined in his horse, surveying the scene with narrowed eyes. "Something's wrong," he said, nodding toward the Silver Spur Saloon, visible even at this distance by its distinctive blue facade. "It's dark. Friday night, it should be lit up like a Christmas tree." Rosalie followed his gaze, noting the unusual stillness around the saloon. Could the meeting have been cancelled after what happened in Denver? Possibly. Gabriel's expression remained troubled. Or moved. Either way, we need to get to the ranch. They skirted the town, taking a longer route to avoid being seen. The last miles to the Sunrise Valley Ranch seemed endless, each bend in the trail increasing their apprehension. When the ranch house finally came into view, Gabriel drew his revolver. The building was dark, no welcoming lamps burning in the windows despite the late hour. "Stay behind me," he instructed as they approached the barn, first seeking to stable their exhausted mounts. Inside, they found the ranch horses restless but unharmed. Isaiah's gelding was missing, as was Margaret's old mare, a good sign suggesting they had left of their own accord rather than being taken. They moved toward the house with careful steps, alert for any sign of danger. The front door stood partially open, creaking softly in the evening breeze. Gabriel pushed it wider with the barrel of his revolver, then stepped inside. "Margaret," he called softly. "Emma." Silence answered him. Rosalie followed her heart in her throat as they moved through the darkened rooms. Nothing seemed disturbed, no signs of struggle or forced entry. It was as if the occupants had simply walked out, leaving everything in order. In the kitchen, Rosalie found a note pinned to the table with a carving knife. She lit a lamp with shaking hands and held it close to read the message. "Gabriel," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "You need to see this." He joined her, taking the note from her trembling fingers. It was written in Margaret's precise hand. Gabriel Sheriff Jenkins came with warning. Said men were coming for Emma. Isaiah took her to the old mining cabin in Bear Creek Canyon. Lily and I followed separate trail to create confusion. We'll wait there 3 days. If you don't come, Isaiah will take Emma to his people in Utah Territory. Trust no one in town. Montgomery and the colonel were asking questions. Margaret Gabriel's shoulders sagged with momentary relief. "They got away," he breathed. "Isaiah knows what he's doing. The Bear Creek cabin is well hidden." "How far?" Rosalie asked. 4 hours' ride in good conditions." Gabriel glanced out the window at the gathering darkness. "Too dangerous to attempt tonight, especially on tired horses. So we wait until morning." The thought of Emma hiding in a remote cabin, frightened and silent, made Rosalie's chest ache. "We rest for a few hours," Gabriel decided. "Leave before dawn. They're safe for now. Isaiah would die before letting anything happen to Emma." They settled into an uneasy vigilance, taking turns to sleep, while the other kept watch. Rosalie found herself unable to rest deeply, jerking awake at every creak of the old house settling. During one such wakeful period, she found Gabriel standing at the window, silhouetted against the starlit sky. "What happens after?" she asked softly. "When this is over?" He turned his face half in shadow. "I don't know," he admitted. "For so long, finding justice for Isabel has been my only purpose. I haven't thought beyond it." "And Emma, what does she need?" Gabriel was silent for a long moment. "A normal life," he finally said. "A home without shadows. A chance to be a child again." He looked directly at Rosalie. "She needs what you've started to give her: patience, understanding, a feminine influence she's lacked since Isabel died." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. Rosalie felt her heart race, but before she could respond, a sound from outside drew their attention. Hoofbeats approaching, multiple riders coming fast. "Get down!" Gabriel hissed, drawing his revolver and extinguishing the lamp in one fluid motion. Rosalie dropped to the floor, crawling to the window to peek through the lower corner of the curtain. What she saw made her blood run cold. Riders, at least 6 of them, were surrounding the house. At their head was a figure she recognized instantly: Colonel Prescott, his military bearing unmistakable, even in the darkness. "They found us," she whispered. Gabriel nodded grimly. Back door. Now. They moved silently through the house, but before they could reach the rear exit, a voice called from outside. Reed, we know you're in there. Come out and face me like a man. Gabriel froze, his face hardening at the colonel's taunt. Go, he whispered to Rosalie. The root cellar has a tunnel that leads to the creek bed. Follow it downstream to the stand of cottonwoods, then head west to Bear Creek Canyon. I'm not leaving you, Rosalie protested. You have to. Gabriel's eyes bore into hers with fierce intensity. Emma needs you. If neither of us makes it to the cabin, Isaiah will take her away. She'll be alone. The thought of Emma waiting in vain, believing herself abandoned again, settled Rosalie's resolve. What will you do? Buy you time. Gabriel's hand cupped her cheek briefly. Go, now. Gabriel, Rosalie began, but he silenced her with a look. I'll find you, he promised. Trust me. With a final anguished glance, Rosalie slipped toward the kitchen and the root cellar door hidden beneath a rug. Behind her, she heard Gabriel move to the front of the house. I'm coming out, Prescott, he called. Just me and you, man to man. Rosalie's hands shook as she lifted the trapdoor, revealing the dark space below. She descended quickly, pulling the door closed above her. In the pitch blackness, she felt her way forward, finding the narrow tunnel Gabriel had described. It was a tight fit, clearly designed for emergency escapes rather than comfort. She crawled on hands and knees through the damp earth cobwebs, catching in her hair the sound of her own ragged breathing, loud in the confined space. Behind her, muffled by distance and earth, came the sound of gunshots. Rosalie froze, terror gripping her heart. Was Gabriel? No, she couldn't think that way. She had to focus on reaching Emma, on keeping her promise. The tunnel seemed endless, but finally she felt cool night air on her face. She emerged cautiously, finding herself in a dry creek bed, as Gabriel had described. Distant shouting suggested the men were still at the ranch house, perhaps searching for her. Staying low, Rosalie made her way downstream, grateful for the nearly full moon that illuminated her path. When she reached the stand of cottonwoods, she paused, getting her bearings, before turning west toward Bear Creek Canyon. The terrain was challenging, especially in the dark. Rosalie stumbled often, her city-bred instincts poorly suited to navigating wilderness at night. But the thought of Emma waiting, perhaps believing herself abandoned once more, drove her forward, despite exhaustion and fear. Dawn was breaking when she finally reached the canyon, its steep walls rising like sentinels on either side of a rushing stream. Somewhere above, hidden among the pines, was the cabin where Emma waited. Rosalie followed the game trail that wound upward, her legs burning with effort, and her lungs straining in the thin mountain air. As she rounded a bend, she saw it, a small log structure nestled against the canyon wall, smoke curling from its stone chimney. Relief made her knees weak. She had made it. Emma was safe. "That's far enough," came a deep voice from the trees to her left. Rosalie froze, raising her hands slowly. "Isaiah. It's me, Rose." Isaiah Wilson stepped from the shadows, a rifle cradled in his arms. His expression shifted from wariness to concern when he recognized her. "Miss Morgan, where's Gabriel?" "Prescott and his men came to the ranch," Rosalie explained, her voice breaking. "Gabriel stayed behind to give me time to escape. I don't know if he—" She couldn't finish the thought. Isaiah's face darkened, but he maintained his composure. "Come inside. You look dead on your feet." The cabin's interior was warm and surprisingly comfortable. Emma sat at a rough-hewn table, a slate and chalk before her. When she saw Rosalie, her eyes widened in disbelief. then filled with tears. She launched herself across the room, colliding with Rosalie in a fierce embrace. "I'm here, sweetheart," Rosalie murmured, holding the girl tightly. "I'm here." Margaret emerged from the cabin's single bedroom, her weathered face lined with worry. "Rose, thank God. But where's Gabrielle?" Rosalie explained what had happened as Emma clung to her side. The girl's face grew increasingly distressed as she understood that her father was in danger. "We have to help him," she wrote frantically on her slate. "We will," Isaiah promised, checking his rifle. "But we need a plan. Prescott has men, resources." "And we have evidence," Rosalie countered. "Everything we learned in Denver, everything Reynolds documented. It's enough to bring them all down Prescott Montgomery, the whole operation." "Evidence doesn't help if Gabriel is dead," Margaret said bluntly. Emma flinched at the words, and Rosalie pulled her closer. "He's not," she insisted. "Gabriel is too smart, too resourceful." "What if the colonel hurts him?" Emma wrote, her hand trembling. Rosalie knelt before the girl, looking directly into eyes so like her father's. "Your father has been fighting for justice for 5 years," she said firmly. "He's not going to give up now, and neither are we." A sound outside, a snapping twig, a dislodged stone, silenced them all. Isaiah moved to the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. "Rider coming," he reported, "single, moving slow." Rosalie's heart leapt. "Gabriel, can't tell yet." Isaiah positioned himself by the door, rifle ready. "Stay back, all of you." The tension in the cabin was palpable as they waited, straining to hear the approach of the unknown rider. Emma pressed herself against Rosalie, trembling with fear, or hope, or both. Then came a voice calling from outside, weary but unmistakable. "Isaiah, Margaret, it's me." "Gabriel!" Rosalie cried, relief washing through her like a physical force. Isaiah opened the door, and Gabriel stumbled in, exhausted and battered, but wonderfully, gloriously alive. His right arm was bandaged with what looked like a piece of his shirt blood seeping through the makeshift dressing. Emma reached him first, launching herself into his arms with such force that he staggered back a step. He caught her with his good arm, holding her close as she sobbed silently against his chest. "I'm here, little one," he murmured into her hairs. "I'm here." Rosalie hung back, giving them their moment, though everything in her yearned to ensure for herself that he was truly all right. Gabriel looked up, his eyes finding hers over Emma's head, and the relief and gratitude in his gaze nearly undid her. "You made it," he said simply. "As did you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, though not unscathed. Gabriel glanced at his injured arm. "Bullet grazed me. Nothing serious." "What happened with Prescott?" Isaiah demanded, helping Gabriel to a chair as Emma reluctantly released him. "He thought he had me cornered," Gabriel explained, wincing as Margaret began examining his wound. "But I know that land better than he ever will. Managed to pick off 2 of his men before slipping away in the confusion." A grim smile touched his lips. "Left him alive, though. I want him to face justice, not a bullet." "Did you get him?" Emma wrote, showing her slate to her father. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we will," Gabriel promised. "We have the evidence now, and Prescott has shown his hand. He can't hide behind his uniform anymore." "So what's next?" Lily asked from the bedroom doorway, where she had been listening silently. "The territorial governor," Gabriel replied. "Reynolds is already taking our evidence to him. With Fletcher's testimony and the documents we found, it should be enough for arrest warrants for Prescott, Montgomery, and Collins." "And if it's not?" Margaret's practical question hung in the air. Gabriel's expression hardened. Then I finish this my way." The cabin fell silent as they absorbed the implications of his words. Rosalie looked at Emma, seeing the fear in the girl's eyes at her father's tone. "It will be enough," Rosalie said firmly. "The law will handle this, Gabriel. Emma needs her father, not a vigilante." Their eyes locked in silent communication, Rosalie pleading. Gabriel conflicted. Finally, he nodded, some of the darkness receding from his gaze. "You're right," he conceded. "Justice, not revenge. For Emma's sake." The tension in the cabin eased slightly. Margaret finished bandaging Gabriel's arm properly, and Isaiah set about preparing a meal, the domestic tasks grounding them all in the moment, rather than the uncertain future. As evening fell, they settled into the small cabin's limited space as best they could. Emma refused to leave her father's side, eventually falling asleep against his shoulder at the table. Gabriel carried her to the bedroom, where she would share the single bed with Margaret and Lily. When he returned, he found Rosalie sitting alone by the fire, Isaiah having gone outside to keep watch. "Thank you," he said quietly, joining her on the rough bench, "for getting to Emma, for reminding me what's truly important." "She loves you so much," Rosalie replied. "Your revenge wouldn't bring Isabel back, but it could cost Emma her father. That's too high a price." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, watching the flames dance in the hearth. "When did you become so wise?" he finally asked, a hint of gentle teasing in his voice. "I've had good teachers," she replied with a small smile. "Loss, survival, a stubborn rancher with a wounded heart." His hand found hers in the firelight, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And what about you, Rose? What do you want when this is over?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, her focus had been simply on surviving the next day, the next week. Wants and dreams had seemed like luxuries she couldn't afford. "I want," she began hesitantly, "I want somewhere to belong. People to care for who care for me in return. Purpose." She looked up at him, suddenly vulnerable. "I want what I've found at the Sunrise Valley with you and Emma." Gabriel's eyes softened, the firelight reflecting in their blue depths. "We want that too," he said softly. "When I thought Prescott might have captured you, might have hurt you." He shook his head, unable to continue. "I'm here," Rosalie assured him, echoing the words she had spoken to Emma. "I'm not going anywhere." Gabriel's free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle as if she were something precious. "Promise? I promise," she whispered. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar, yet new, comfortable, yet thrilling. Rosalie leaned into the kiss, her hand rising to rest against his chest, where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. The moment was interrupted by Isaiah's return, the foreman clearing his throat discreetly as he entered. Gabriel and Rosalie moved apart, though their hands remained linked. "All quiet outside," Isaiah reported tactfully, ignoring their closeness. "But we should post watches through the night. Prescott isn't the type to give up easily." "Agreed," Gabriel said reluctantly, releasing Rosalie's hand. "I'll take first watch. You two get some rest." Rosalie wanted to protest. Gabriel needed rest more than any of them after his ordeal, but she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Instead, she squeezed his hand once more before rising. "Wake me." "For the second watch," she insisted. "You need sleep too." He nodded, though whether in agreement or merely to appease her was unclear. As Rosalie made her way to the corner where blankets had been arranged for her terror, she felt his eyes following her, warm and protective. Despite the danger still lurking outside, despite the uncertainty of the days ahead, Rosalie felt a sense of peace settle over her. They were together. They had each other. and whatever came next, they would face it as a family. Dawn brought an unexpected visitor. Isaiah, taking the final watch, spotted the rider approaching from the east, a lone figure on a lathered horse pushing hard up the canyon trail. "Rider coming," he called, waking the cabin's occupants. "Just one moving fast." Gabriel was instantly alert, his revolver in hand, as he moved to the window. "It's Jenkins," he said with surprise, recognizing the Silverton sheriff. "Could be a trap." Isaiah warned, rifle ready. "Maybe," Gabriel conceded, "but Jenkins helped get Margaret and Emma to safety. Let's hear what he has to say." He stepped onto the cabin's small porch as Jenkins dismounted, the sheriff raising his hands to show he was alone and meant no harm. "Read," Jenkins called. "Got news you need to hear." "Speak your piece," Gabriel replied, not lowering his revolver. Jenkins approached slowly, his expression grim. "Prescott is dead." A stunned silence followed the announcement. Rosalie, who had joined Gabriel on the porch, felt her breath catch. "How?" Gabriel demanded. "Shot himself when the federal marshals came to arrest him at the Silver Spur last night." Jenkins removed his hat, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's over, Reed. Reynolds came through. The governor issued warrants for Prescott, Montgomery, and Collins. Montgomery's already in custody. Collins was arrested trying to flee to Mexico." Gabriel's face was unreadable. "And the evidence, will it hold? Rock solid according to the federal prosecutor. Fletcher is singing like a canary trying to save his own skin." Jenkins shook his head in disgust. 5 years of corruption and murder all coming to light at once. Half the businessmen in Silverton are being questioned about their connections to the operation. Rosalie watched Gabriel, carefully sensing the complex emotions warring within him. Satisfaction that justice was being served. Disappointment that Prescott had escaped. True accountability, uncertainty about what came next. "My wife," he said finally. "Will the official record be corrected? Will she and the other victims be acknowledged?" Jenkins nodded. "Already in process. The governor's ordered a full investigation into the fire, with all the new evidence included. Isabel's journalism about the illegal mining operations will be part of the official record." He hesitated, then added, "She was right all along, Reed. She was a hell of a woman." "Yes," Gabriel agreed softly. "She was." Emma appeared in the doorway behind them, her eyes wide with question. Gabriel turned to her, kneeling to meet her gaze. "It's over, little one," he said gently. "The bad men can't hurt anyone anymore. Your mother's work helped stop them, even after all this time." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but there was something different in them now. Not just grief, but pride. She wrote quickly on her slate, "Can we go home now?" "Yes," Gabriel promised, pulling her into an embrace. "We can go home." As they prepared to leave the cabin, gathering their few belongings and ensuring the fire was properly extinguished, Rosalie found herself standing alone on the porch, looking out over the canyon. The morning sun cast long shadows across the landscape, but it was beautiful rather than threatening now. She heard Gabriel's footsteps behind her, felt his presence before he spoke. "What are you thinking?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "About beginnings," she replied honestly. "About how sometimes they come disguised as endings." Gabriel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Wise words. "I've had good teachers," she repeated her statement from the night before, smiling up at him. His answering smile was tender, the weight of 5 years' grief and obsession finally lifting from his shoulders. "Come home with us, Rose," he said softly, "not as an employee, not as a guest, as family." The word resonated in her heart, filling spaces that had been empty for too long. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. As they rejoined the others inside, Emma approached Rosalie with her slate. On it, she had written a single sentence that brought tears to Rosalie's eyes. "Will you be my new mother?" Rosalie knelt before the girl, taking her small hands in her own. "If that's what you want, sweetheart, nothing would make me happier." Emma's response was unexpected and miraculous. Her lips moved, forming sounds she hadn't uttered in 5 years. The word was barely audible, rusty from disuse, but unmistakable. "Yes." Gabriel's sharp intake of breath echoed Rosalie's own shock. Emma looked as surprised as they were, her hand flying to her throat, as if to verify the sound had truly come from her. "Emma," Gabriel whispered, dropping to his knees beside them. "Did you just—" The girl swallowed hard, then tried again, the word slightly stronger this time. "Yes." Tears streamed down Gabriel's face as he gathered his daughter in his arms. "That's my brave girl," he murmured. "My strong, brave girl." Over Emma's head his eyes met Rosalie's, overflowing with gratitude, and something deeper, something that made her heart soar despite the trials they had endured. Love. Not the desperate, clinging attachment born of shared danger, but something true and solid. A foundation on which to build a future. "Let's go home," Rosalie said softly. Touch. Autumn turned to winter at the Sunrise Valley Ranch, snow blanketing the valley in pristine white. The house, once shadowed by grief and obsession, now rang with Emma's hesitant but increasingly confident voice as she relearned the speech that trauma had stolen from her. Gabriel and Rosalie were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Emma as their only attendant. Isaiah stood proudly as Gabriel's best man, while Margaret wept openly throughout the proceedings, claiming all the while that it was dust in her eye. The territorial governor personally oversaw the prosecution of Judge Montgomery and James Collins, both of whom received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in the Denver Silver Mining Company fire and the subsequent cover-up. Fletcher, in exchange for his testimony, received a reduced sentence, but would still spend years behind bars. Most importantly, Isabel Reed and the other victims were finally given the justice they deserved. The official record was amended to acknowledge the fire as arson, and a memorial was erected in Denver to honor those who had lost their lives. Life at the ranch settled into new patterns. Rosalie took over the household accounts, revealing a talent for business that complemented Gabriel's practical ranching knowledge. Together, they expanded the Sunrise Valley's operations, adding a small apple orchard that became Rosalie's special project. Emma flourished under their joint care, her voice growing stronger, even as the nightmares that had plagued her for years gradually receded. She still drew, but her sketches now captured the beauty of the mountains rather than the horrors of the past. On the anniversary of Isabel's death, the three of them rode together to a small rise overlooking the valley where a simple stone marker had been placed in her memory. Emma laid wildflowers beside it, then stepped back to allow Gabriel a moment alone. Rosalie watched from a distance as he knelt by the marker, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a private farewell. When he rejoined them, his face was peaceful. "She would be proud of you," Rosalie said softly, "of the man you've become, of the father you are to Emma, and of the family we've built." Gabriel added his arm, slipping around her waist, as Emma came to stand between them. "All three of us." As they rode back to the ranch, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, casting long shadows across the snow-covered valley. Rosalie looked at the man and child beside her, feeling a sense of completion she had never thought to find again after losing her parents. The Sunrise Valley Ranch had lived up to its name, a place of new beginnings after the darkest night. A place where three wounded souls had found healing in each other's company. A place where the sky, once filled with shadows, now promised endless sunshine. Home.